Welcome. I'm Dr. Jeff Bland, your host for this Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute program that is co-sponsored by Big Bold Health on aspects of immunorejuvenation, aspects of longevity, the whole nature of how we reset our biological clock, and the nature of where we're heading in the field of regenerative medicine, anti-aging medicine from a biological perspective, gerosciences, gerotherapeutics. All of those terms are new, and they frame a whole new perspective about aging as a condition. So we will have an extraordinary opportunity to explore that with, I think, a star faculty, Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Robert Silverman, Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and myself will take on the topic of reviewing and looking at the clinical applications of this topic. And then at the end, we will have an open-ended panel discussion among the four of us that I think you'll find very interesting to look at the takeaway value from these concepts. So with that in mind, let me jump into the material at hand, and I get the privilege of being kind of the introducer of this program. So I have to first go down here and examine where I'm going to find the materials. So sorry. Reduction of immune system aging, new perspectives, new opportunities. And again, I feel very fortunate and privileged to share the podium with three other remarkable faculty. So let's jump right in. So this particular focuses on this virtual revolution, the understanding of epigenetics and how they relate to immune aging and how that connects to immune function and later diseases. It's now been found that aging of the immune system at a biological level is probably the singular most important predictor of our longevity and our health patterns as we grow older. So it's a very, very important topic, and we know it connects into environmental diet and lifestyle exposures and how that influences the epigenome of the immune system. So all of this takes personalized lifestyle medicine into the 21st century. And so with that, we will be really looking at immunorejuvenation and longevity, specifically advances in the personalized lifestyle medicine therapy as I perceive this field evolving. So there are conditions, as you know, that are associated with disturbed immunorejuvenation. And that laundry list grows longer all the time, and they represent some of the major chronic illnesses that we have today, where the immune system is aged prematurely or it has lost its resiliency. Things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease, desert storm syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, or PANS, chronic Epstein-Barr virus syndrome, post-COVID, Guillain-Barré, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, gluten sensitivity, early stage dementia syndrome. These are just a small list of those conditions associated with alteration in our immune system function is associated with premature immune disturbance, immune aging. We know that targeting immune dysfunction and aging is a critically important focus for medicine as we move forward. In this recent article, they talk about anti-aging immune therapies that are targeted to the immune system represents a potent approach for improving health span. Reviewing age changes and major components of the immune system, they summarize the current immune targeting therapeutic approaches in the context of aging and discuss directions for the field of immunorejuvenation, a new term that's really being coined now and operant in the literature with more frequency, immunorejuvenation, turning back the clock of the immune system. So this cellular rejuvenation has molecular mechanisms that have been discovered just over the last few years that we'll be highlighting in the course of this discussion. They include intrinsic factors like those of cell biology and genetics alone, but there are many extrinsic factors, the modifiable factors, diet and lifestyle and toxins, things that then relate to the alteration in immune architecture and immune genetics as it relates to epigenetic regulation of gene expression. It's these factors that we'll be focusing on how they regulate gene expression through chromatin remodeling and histone modifications and the changes in DNA methylation patterns, all of which we now know play roles in determining how our immune system functions. So these are the marks that come on our immune system genome as a consequence of the experiences in life. Those are that we'll be talking about. So this factor that we call immune rejuvenation or immunorejuvenation That process is really related to the balanced immune system. Balanced immune rejuvenation has to do with both immunosuppression and immunoactivation being in balance with one another. You don't want a system that is too far on either side of that teeter-totter. You don't want it to be too suppressed. You don't want it to be too stimulatory. You want it to have the resilience to respond to the demands that our exposures and lifestyle may bring us. That rejuvenation of the immune system provides that resilience, and that's the balance. So we don't want to boost a already imbalanced immune system. That would possibly even aggravate the system and make it worse. What we want to do is to provide a broader capacity for resilience in the immune system by balancing its immunosuppressive and immunostimulatory factors that are all resonant in the genes of our immune system. So how do we target immune dysfunctions? We look at establishing that balance by looking at the various cell types and organs that are involved with immune regulation. It breaks down obviously into the innate immune system and the acquired or adaptive immune system and the T lymphocyte crosstalk. Between those systems, it has to do with the various organs of the body like the thymus gland, the pineal gland, areas of our body that particularly influence immune system function, the thyroid gland. All of these are cross-talking and co-reacting with one another to respond to the 24/7, 365 message of our environment. Our body is constantly being exposed to new information, new signals. Those signals are picked up by receptors, translated through these receptors into these various tissues and organs and cell types, into ultimately how our immune system is going to respond and its vigilance. Some of those marks that our immune system gets are very marks that lock us into hyper-stimulated effects and cause hyper activation of immune system function, which is often seen in inflammation. Others can lock us into immunosuppressive effects and cause us to be less resilient, less responsive, and have allergies and other types of dysfunctions associated with immunosuppression. So the key here is to find the right balance, send the right signals to our immune system and the organs that support it, so that they will then regulate gene expression of the immune system and provide a proper response. You know, the ultimate origin of all these cells I've talked about in the immune system, the hemopoietic system, is the stem cells, the hemopoietic stem cells that reside within our bone marrow. And so this whole system of translating the pluripotential messages that are in the bone marrow cells, the hemopoietic stem cells, ultimately into their differentiated state that becomes the adaptive and innate immune systems, is going to be influenced and regulated by the exposures that we are experiencing in our lives. Diet, lifestyle, environment, toxins, stress, all these various factors play roles. And what we start to recognize now as the most recent breakthroughs in understanding is that there is this process built into our system to rejuvenate the immune system. So we don't just collect injury and damage over time without any one-way street to restoration. That there are these pathways for restoration, and those are the ones that we'll be speaking to in this discussion. So these are key research areas and opportunities within immune system aging. And I found this little red-lined or red-boxed summary to be very important for how we're going to travel in this topic. It goes on to say that a strategy to reverse identified defects or these marks, epigenetic marks that occur in our immune system, are specific focus upon aging of the innate immune system and the role of commensal bacteria in inflammation and aging. So we're going to bring the gut bacteria into this story as well, and need for better and more precise models to facilitate studies and provide translation towards clinical application of this process of immunorejuvenation. So this is all rather recent types of discussions, 2009 to 2023, research progress in immune system function. Well, if we look early on, does the immune system start to change its function before we get the onset of an immune disorder, immune disease? The answer is becoming more and more yes to that. Here's just one bit of information that says that we can actually start to explore alteration in the immune system well before we get a significant disease factor of immune imbalance. This is looking at sputum antibodies that have been found to predict the development of rheumatoid arthritis years before the onset of the condition. And so here they looked at NACCP, IgG plus antibodies in the saliva and found very significant correlation between early stage elevation in saliva of these antibodies and later stage, 17 months later, onset of disease. So there are many variables, many biomarkers that we see that are associated with early onset conditions that we need to be more aware of. And there are natural ingredients to improve immune function. I'm very interested in this particular article because they talk about immune enhancing properties of many plants and fungi that are due to bioactive constituents in these plants, these phytoconstituents. And they fall into many families such as polyphenols, terpenoids, beta-glucans, including even vitamins. And we need to add to that, obviously, pre and probiotics, now that we understand that the microbiome plays a role also in immune patterning. So all of these become part of the tools, the architecture of the toolbox of ways that we can improve and rejuvenate immune system function. This, I think, becomes very important when we start talking about dietary supplements for preserving and protecting the immune system in healthy individuals. This is a systematic review of a number of different published papers over the last few years that have talked about a vision of health promotion and resilience, rather than focusing on disease itself, focus on the promotion of function of the immune system. So this goes beyond prevention of disease. This is talking about the enhancement of the functional resilience of the immune system through the process of immunorejuvenation. And we know that there are a whole series of vitamins and minerals that are important for the immunometabolism, the support of immunometabolism. The B vitamins obviously are very important: folate, B6, B12, thiamine, riboflavin. We also recognize that the folate-containing nutrients, pyridoxine, and those that are part of the tetrahydrofolate cycle that help to deliver methyl groups in the methylation of the genome, very important. And we recognize that various members of the phytochemical family, supposedly those that were previously not recognized as being so important in immune system function, we now recognize that many of these several thousand members of the phytochemical family also have been found to have immunorejuvenating capability. So it's a very rapidly advancing field of understanding, and very exciting to see how nutraceuticals may be potential therapeutic modulators in immunometabolism. And this goes beyond just the traditional vitamins and minerals to polyphenolic materials, as I mentioned, to essential fatty acids, particularly members of the omega-3 fatty acids, the EPA-DHA families, and also within that family, the pro-resolving mediators, these PRMs that are part of the metabolites of the immune system of the EPA-DHA that give rise ultimately to these regulatory substances that help to regulate immune system function. So it's a very rich array of different therapeutic potential agents that can be employed for modulation of immune rejuvenation. So let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids to start with. So fish oil supplementation in patients with and without systemic lupus erythematosus, targeting pro-inflammatory activities and with the pro-resolving mediators I mentioned. So this is a very interesting recent paper, again, out of Harvard, Mass General, looking at this cross-sectional exploratory study using higher levels of the SPM containing omega-3 fatty acids to modulate the inflammation seen in SLE patients. So this is an early stage kind of preliminary report, but certainly very encouraging to say that SPM, or pro-resolving mediator rich omega-3 factors, are very important for modulating immune function, in this case in a inflammatory autoimmune disorder. So this is fairly new breakthrough information using these enriched marine oil supplements that are enriched in pro-resolving mediators, these SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators. This is another recent study, a clinical trial, intervention trial, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, actually looking at the intervention with a PRM enriched omega-3 fatty acid oil in individuals with altered immune function, showing that supplementation with this enriched PRM oil increased peripheral blood SPM concentrations, and also was found to have important reprogramming effects upon peripheral immune cells. So this is a clinical intervention trial, again, illustrating that PRM containing oils, omega-3 oils, that can be administered orally by oral administration can influence effectively monocyte phagocytosis and innate immune function in ways that would be considered very valuable in a clinical intervention program. We also know from this paper that a pro-resolving mediator enriched fish oil supplement shifts microglial polarization towards the anti-inflammatory M2 state. Also ameliorates retinal degeneration. This is an animal rodent study, but again shows, I think from a biological model, the power that we're starting to see in these orally supplemented PRM-rich oils that enhance the value of EPA and DHA. In a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study looking on chronic pain and inflammation, this is again using a PRM-enriched oil orally administered to humans who have chronic pain and reduced functionality and quality of life was reduced, that upon oral supplementation, it was found that there was an improvement in quality of life indices. There was a reduction in pain that was measured by a standard pain metric evaluation, again showing that you get added benefit from the PRM rich oils. And these are oils that have not been highly processed or are from natural sources where the oil has retained its PRM level. And that's one of the reasons that we got so interested in cod liver oil that was extracted from the liver of the cod in a way before it had undergone degradation that preserves in the high PRM content. This cod liver oil, I think, has a dramatically high ability to regulate inflammatory process through immune regulation. So what about immune rejuvenating impacts of dietary flavonoids and polyphenols? I mentioned that they are also part of the immunorejuvenation program that's been discovered over the last few years. We know about the phytochemistry and bioactivities and metabolites from various foods. One that we've been studying extensively is Phagopyrum tatarticum. That's Tartary buckwheat, an ancient plant that's been cultivated by humans for use as a food for over 2,000 years, one of the oldest foods actually that we know of. It turns out this plant is extraordinarily rich in 150 or so different phytochemicals, 50 of which are members of the polyphenol and flavonoid family that are uniquely active in immune system function. And so there have been many studies published recently on the role of Tartary buckwheat in improving outcome with a variety of indices that are associated with immune system function, like tiredness, sleep, recovery from illness, neurodegenerative conditions. So it appears as if there is this rich array of food-based evidence that the Tartary buckwheat, which is so rich in this orchestration of these polyphenols, has a very dramatically positive effect on immunorejuvenation and the symptoms associated with immune aging. In looking at how this actually works at a cellular mechanistic level, a study was recently done uncovering the relationship of the mechanism of Tartary buckwheat in a network pharmacological approach. And it was very powerful, and it was shown that the orchestration by this array of phytochemicals that are present in Tartary buckwheat, not just one at a time, not just quercetin, luteolin, rutin, diosmin, one at a time, but this whole orchestration of this extraordinary family of nutrients was found to have a very powerful effect on outcome of positive immune system function. Now I ask the question, why does a plant go to the trouble of making all these different array of phytochemicals? It seems like it takes a lot of metabolic work for it to do that. It doesn't have nothing better to do, and of course the answer is no. It makes this array because that array, that symphony, is what it needs for its own defense. These plants have their own immune defense. That immune defense is then passed on to us as we eat those plants through this array of these phytochemicals. So this is not a one-shot on goal type approach. This is a complex systems biology approach that relates to these phytochemicals that are present in these foods that have been found to have immunorejuvenating capability. It's interesting to note the Himalayan tartary buckwheat has also been found to contain a very unique phytochemical that's not found in really any other plant food, and that's a material called 2-hydroxylbenzylamine. 2-hydroxylbenzylamine, abbreviated 2-HOBA or 2-HOBA. It turns out that this particular phytochemical has been found to have very powerful effects on modulating immune system function, immunogenicity, and reducing inflammatory conditions at the cellular level. So this is another unique feature of tartary buckwheat's portfolio of different phytochemicals. It's one of the, if not the only plant that's been found to have 2-hydroxylbenzylamine or 2-HOBA as this immune active substance. So there's a crosstalk then between these phytochemicals, the vitamins and minerals, and our gut microbiota and how that relates to our immunity. I think all of us certainly know the story about more than 60% of our immune system being clustered around our gastrointestinal system, the so-called gastrointestinal lymphoid tissue. We know how important this is. It cuts across so many different conditions if it's imbalanced, leading to immunological imbalance, either immunosuppressive or excessive in its vigilance and inflammation. So this is one of those balancing points of our immunomodulatory processes, is the gut microbiome and how it intercommunicates with our immune system. So there are a variety of agents that have been found to be effective in helping to balance that immune system connection to our gut microbiome. One of those substances, the family of prebiotic fibers called glucans. And there are a whole different series of members of the glucan family. Beta-glucan, that's been derived from a single cellular microalgae, Euglena gracilis, has been found to have extraordinary positive effects on regulating innate immune system function, rebalancing immunity. In human clinical trials, it's been shown to have very positive outcome in raising secretory IgA as well as immune response. So here's an example of a food-related substance, complex in its nature, that delivers a family of phytochemicals, one of which is a certain member of the beta-glucan family, that then helps to regulate gene expression of our innate immune system. This is actually a placebo-controlled, double-blind placebo-controlled trial of the effect of Euglena gracilis fermentate on immune function in healthy active adults. This is beta-1,3-glucan, which actually is one of the ingredients that we have in our microbiome rejuvenate that's very powerful for this innate immune system restoration effect. So again, going back to what does it take for immunorejuvenation to occur? There's a whole series of signals that the immune system picks up through this epigenetic regulation process, and allows in for the repatterning and reprogramming of the immune system to be back in balance. The data from this particular study, I think, are very impressive, highly statistically significant difference of colds and flu and respiratory infections and duration infections, sick days after a person took the beta-glucan Euglena gracilis supplement. There was a significant reduction in those indices of URIs and sick days from viral infection. So again, this is putting it to the test, so to speak, with a clinical trial. We also know that there are specific members of the microbe family, the gut microbiome, that are very well suited for helping to improve immunorejuvenation of the gut immune system. One of those is Lactobacillus rhamnosus, different strains of this specific species. There are a number of human clinical trials on the application of Lactobacillus rhamnosus to look at B cell response of the acquired or adaptive immune system, but it also has a positive impact on the innate immune system as well. So the combination of prebiotics, as seen with the beta-glucans from Gracilis, and the probiotics as it relates to Lactobacillus rhamnosus, frames a really powerful tool for improving gut immune function. So Lactobacillus rhamnosus, reducing CD4/8 cell-mediated inflammation in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, recently published in 2023 in Immunobiology. They conclude that the strain of Lactobacillus rhamnosus effectively suppresses overactivity of CD8 cell-mediated inflammation and increases the regulation of the Th2 and Th1 balance points within immune system status. So again, this is really a powerful step forward in us better understanding the clinical outcome and potential tools that we have in our toolkit for immunorejuvenation. So the microbiome and its microbiota regulate neuronal function and have some very interesting impacts upon learning. This was a recent work that was pioneered by Kevin Tracy and a group of investigators that has been considered major breakthrough. It has to do with mood, mind, memory, and behavior and the connection to our immune system and our gut microbiome. The metabolomic analysis defined the various metabolites from certain bacteria that influence then neuronal function. And so it's both through the vagus nerve and through the systemic circulation of these metabolites that you can modulate nervous system function through gut microbiome. So there's an association of gut microbial genera with heart rate variability. Now, why is that important? Because heart rate variability is a measurement indirectly. It's a surrogate measure of your parasympathetic nervous system function. And that interconnects with the state of your immune system. When you are immune hyperactivated and you have in a pro-inflammatory state, it shifts your immune system more into the away from the parasympathetic into the sympathetic arousal system, and you then lose this immune balance that we talked about in the attempts for immunorejuvenation. We now know that heart rate variability is a surrogate marker for the parasympathetic versus sympathetic balance. Higher HRV is higher parasympathetic function, and we have seen now studies showing that gut microbial activity plays a role in HRV and can help to stabilize parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system function. That's a pretty powerful kind of example of the interconnectedness, the system of biology connectedness among the nervous system, the immune system, and the gut microbiome, and the therapeutic potential for modulating that through intervention at the gut microbiome immune level. Really powerful steps forward in our understanding how to harness some of these tools in clinical practice. Just to remind you what heart rate variability is all about. This is the difference between heartbeats. They're not exactly rhythmically paced. And the more variability you have, the higher the heart rate variability, the more plasticity you have in your autonomic nervous system, and the more parasympathetic activity, the more kind of relaxation, I would call it headspace or freedom of activity that is present. So increased heart rate variability, the alteration in the specific time sequences of the rhythms of the heart are very important surrogate indicators of the parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system status. So Dr. Tracy actually did some extraordinary studies. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it is really interesting because when he did a vagotomy in animals that had been made hyper-inflammatory by overly stimulating their immune system with the exposure to a mitogen, that you can actually blunt those kind of mimics of arthritis by giving them a inhibitor of inflammatory cytokines, giving them an anti-TNF inhibitor. But if you did a vagotomy on the animal, it eliminates the effect of the anti-TNF compound. It didn't then allow it to quench the inflammatory state. So there is something about the vagus nerve, right? And its interconnection to regulation of the parasympathetic sympathetic balance and how that connects to immune system function. So I want to introduce this vagus system signaling as a very important part of the overall control of our immune balance, and also a place where intervention can be focused. So this is, as you probably know, the the sympathetic nerve and the parasympathetic function, so the vagus integrated interface between the two super systems, the brain and the immune system. This is actually a fantastic review paper written by Dr. Ellenkov and his co-workers at NIH a number of years ago. We were very fortunate to have him as a keynote speaker at the 1996 Institute for Functional Medicine annual symposium. But he delivered early on to us this message that this integrative interface of the brain and the immune system really is heavily involved with the vagus nerve and this parasympathetic sympathetic regulation. So again, we talk about ways to intervene to restore the balance as we're restoring parasympathetic to sympathetic balance. We're also restoring immunovigilance to immunosuppressive balance. So we're engaged in the immunorejuvenation process. So there are many different ways that we can, shots on goal, so to speak, to develop a personalized program for intervention in patients who are looking for and need for immunorejuvenation. The difference between a sympathetic dominant and a parasympathetic dominant, you can look at the different symptom profiles in the phenotype associated with each of those as it relates to how we might find the appropriate balance in our patients. So that means that the sympathetic, you get tachycardia, you get hypertension, you get constipation, versus parasympathetic, you get decreased respiratory rate, lower blood pressure, normal bowel peristalsis, anti-inflammatory immune status. So again, it's vagal stimulation, it's proper pre and probiotics leading to symbiotics for regulation of the gut microbiota, and it's signaling through the immune nervous system, then signals that lead to immunorejuvenation. And that's our heart rate variability in rheumatology, believe it or not. Yes, they are connected. And so that's a surrogate marker, as I mentioned, the HRV, for looking at some of these balance points in assessing how that patient is doing in this regulation of their sympathetic parasympathetic connection to immune and nervous system function. And it predicts then anti-tumor necrosis factor therapy response in inflammatory arthritis. This was a huge breakthrough through the research that Dr. Andrew Holman did, published recently, showing that you can actually predict the success of anti-TNF therapy in autoimmune patients on the basis of heart rate variability. Really powerful and interesting. Look at HRV as a predictor of the effect of an anti-TNF in rheumatoid arthritis. You'll see that individuals that had the greatest response are individuals that had the highest heart rate variability with the highest parasympathetic activity versus those with the lowest parasympathetic activity as measured by HRV. This means that if you have a patient with a low HRV and you put them on TNF alpha blocking therapy, a very expensive drug with a lot of side effects, you're going to have a very much poor outcome. And if you have a person with a higher parasympathetic activity with their immune system speaking correctly to their nervous system, and they're going to need less drugs, and they're going to have a much more powerful positive outcome. It's a very, very interesting exploration of how all these factors intersect and the importance of our immunorejuvenation process in regulating the balance of immune function. So in close, this might relate then to how we're going to look into the management of patients with long COVID. And this long COVID condition associated with various unique kinds of imbalance of the immune system is a place where immunorejuvenation may play a very important role as we move forward with our therapies. So I've kind of talked a little bit about rejuvenating the immune system to regenerate our health. This tied, also I talked about rejuvenating agriculture to have healthy plants that speak to healthy people. And that also regenerates our economics by giving a much more cost-effective way of approaching these extraordinary burdens on our healthcare system, financial burdens, through the disturbed immune system function in need of immune rejuvenation. So that is an introduction. I thank you very much for allowing me to talk through this particular introduction as it relates to factors that we know help to modulate the immune system. And now we're ready to move to our three key experts, clinical experts, Dr. Hyman, Dr. Silverman and Dr. Perlmutter. Thanks so much, and I'll be back with you for our group discussion at the very end. Take care.
I'm excited today to talk to you about the emerging science of longevity, the breakthroughs in longevity science that we're seeing really transform our thinking about health, aging, and disease. And we're going to dive deep into a few topics today. I can't cover it all because it's a lot of information. And I've written a book called Young Forever, which details in more depth a lot of the information we're talking about today, plus driving a little bit more deeper into some of the other hallmarks of aging that we're going to focus on today. Today, we're going to focus mostly on the most important hallmark of aging, which is nutrient sensing and its dysregulation in the process of aging, and how we can address that through food and other interventions. So just to sort of lay a little bit of the background, we are seeing incredible changes in this unfortunate epidemic of chronic disease. We're seeing rethinking of our approach to health and disease. In fact, maybe aging should not be thought of as an inevitable consequence of getting older or the degradation in our biology, but actually a pathological process that if we understand and treat, we could actually reverse our biological age. And I've done this on myself, and I'll show you a little bit, but we need to think about how we increase our health span and get it to equal our lifespan, because the fundamental game here is to compress morbidity into the last bits of life and not spend the last 20% of our lives in poor health, which is what most people do. I did my DNA methylation test, and I am biologically 43 when I did this test when I was 62. And it's really by simply following basic principles of self-care, and mostly which are accessible to everybody without a lot of fancy extravagant therapies, although those are really promising, and I think may even push the limits a little more further. So we need to rethink medicine, we need to rethink disease, we need to rethink health, rather than just focusing on the diseases of aging, which is what most research does: dementia, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and diabetes, for example. We need to focus on the root causes, on the underlying biological disturbances that drive these pathologies. And we're seeing this obviously as a huge epidemic in America. 6 in 10 have a chronic disease, 4 in 10 have more than one. And it's bankrupting our system. And it said 3.5 trillion on this slide. I think it's gone up to 4.3 trillion this year, and it's heading towards 7 trillion. And we now have the ability to actually deal with the metabolic crisis that we have through understanding what drives poor metabolic health, which essentially is a set of some spectrum of insulin resistance that affects, here it was 12.2% of Americans. Now it's 12.2% of Americans are metabolically healthy. Now it's only 6.8, which means 93.2% suffer some degree of high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, overweight, or have had a heart attack or a stroke. And we see, despite spending more than any other nation, we're seeing far less health outcomes and a decrease in life expectancy, which is getting worse every year. So the goal here is to get our health span to equal our lifespan, and to transform our biology by compressing morbidity, by understanding the biological disturbances in our biological networks that drive disease. And I think we're in this moment of medicine, this convergence between understanding of network systems, functional medicine, the omics revolution with deep phenotyping capable now of our genotype, our metabolome, our microbiome. There's 100,000 terabytes of information in the DNA just in our gut, which is, unimaginably large amounts of data that we can't begin to understand as an individual physician or practitioner. But with the help of AI and machine learning and big data analytics, we're able to sort of integrate that, plus all our quantified self data that we're getting from wearables and soon implantables. We're able to really transform our thinking about tracking the disease pathologies that are occurring at an earlier state, and understand the wellness to disease transitions. And this is an emerging field. I mean, I think we're reimagining what health is, what disease is, by understanding the body as a network, not as a set of discrete organs and systems. And that we can, if we work at these fundamental systems level, we can actually create health. And that's what functional medicine is about. It's the science of creating health. And we'll talk more about that. Einstein said it's a wonderful feeling to recognize the unity of complex phenomena that the direct observation appear to be quite separate things. So really, it's understanding the connections underneath everything. And the hallmarks of aging are really a breakthrough in our understanding of human biology that mirror a lot of the functional medicine concepts, from imbalances in the microbiome to insulin resistance and metabolic issues, mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, and there's many more. So we see, as scientists begin to understand these fundamental disturbances that go awry as we get older, that we can intervene in different pathways. Now, like hippie whack-a-mole here too, so we have to be careful, but it's important to understand that there are some master pathways. And I think the most important one is the deregulated nutrient sensing, which affects many of the others. It affects the microbiome, the epigenome, our telomeres, inflammation, our proteins, our mitochondria, even affects the development of zombie cells, our genetic health and genomic instability, stem cell exhaustion, all affected in part by what we're eating and how we're eating and when we're eating. So I'm going to sort of go through these, but I can't cover all of them. I'm going to focus mostly on deregulated nutrient sensing. As you know, there were 9 hallmarks, and I added one that was microbiome was 10. Now there's 13, including the microbiome and many other things. So we're really sort of parsing this out, but essentially these are fundamental pathological processes that occur as we age. That if we address, we could literally extend life 3 or not 5 to 7 years, which we would if we eliminated heart disease and cancer, but by 30 or 40 years. And the goal here is to understand the difference between biological and chronological aging and how we actually can turn back our biological clocks, which is very possible. So let's dive into the most important one. And this is where we're going to get into the meat of the talk, which is deregulated nutrient sensing, because I think it's a master regulator of aging. Question is, what the heck should I eat? And I think that's what we're debating, whether we should be keto or paleo or vegan. There's a whole camp in the longevity space that thinks we should all be vegan. Others that think that we need a lot more protein in meat. So let's sort of get into how all this works. When I think about it, there's 4 main longevity switches that exist in the body that are deep, anciently preserved pathways across many species that can be studied and looked at and have been in depth. And these 4 pathways regulate our response to food, but they also regulate everything else, including inflammation, oxidative stress, DNA repair, mitochondrial function, and a lot of things, autophagy, a lot of things that actually are necessary in terms of the repair and cleanup of our bodies to help us stay healthy as we age. And the key here to understand is the body has its innate built-in regenerative repair renewal systems that we have really overridden by our way of life and by our diet. And by addressing these fundamental pathways, we can activate these ancient survival pathways, these ancient longevity repair mechanisms. I call them longevity switches, including the 2 that I responding to excess, right? Excess sugar and glucose from different forms is our insulin signaling pathways. And then mTOR responds to both protein and carbohydrates and sugar. So they respond to excess, whereas AMPK and sirtuins are these longevity switches that respond to scarcity. And we'll get deep into this in a minute. So the first sort of discovery around longevity was that if we restricted our calories, we would extend our life. And we'd see this with these 2 monkey studies where they took, basically a calorie restricted monkey versus a non-calorie restricted monkey. And they saw profound changes in their health over time. And they were able to actually keep the biological age younger of the calorie restricted monkey. And they've done this in mouse. And they maybe even can extend life by a third, which for a human would mean living to be 120. So the process of calorie restriction leads to this phenomena called autophagy, which is basically self-cleaning, self-cannibalism. It's where we recycle old damaged cells and proteins and use them for making new stuff. So when this process is inhibited by constant feeding and eating, we don't allow this process of self-repair. This is one of those survival mechanisms. And calorie restriction has many different effects, but across the broad range of these nutrient sensing pathways. So it decreases insulin signaling, it inhibits mTOR, it activates AMPK, it activates sirtuins, it leads to autophagy, improved metabolic health, and proteostasis, and basically maintaining all your cellular functions in a very positive way, and leads to sort of delayed aging. And the sort of the way that works is by basically limiting insulin signaling, which has many effects we'll talk about in a minute, inhibiting mTOR, activating AMPK, and activating sirtuins, all of which sort of go into gear to keep us alive when things are scarce. They also affect FOXO indirectly, which is really important in terms of oxidative stress pathways and many others. So let's sort of talk about intermittent fasting, which is sort of a or equivalence, which essentially is a way to address the sort of calorie restriction without actually necessarily having to starve yourself for your whole life, which is not fun. So this would be like a 12 to 16 hour fast every day. You can do longer fast, 24 to 72-hour fast. There's fasting and mimicking diets, which are like 800 calories a day for 5 days that Alter Longo is promoted. Ketogenic diets, 5-2 diets. And basically they all sort of have similar effects. They inhibit mTOR. mTOR, I will talk about in more detail in a minute, which basically, when you inhibit mTOR, it induces autophagy. It reduces insulin signaling and improves insulin sensitivity. It activates AMPK, which is involved in glucose regulation and metabolic health, is how metformin works. It has many other effects we'll talk about. Sirtuins also get activated. We're involved in regulating inflammation, mitochondrial function, DNA repair. It activates PCG1 alpha and FOXO. These are involved in regulating mitochondrial function and biogenesis, as well as inflammation, oxidative stress. It activates autophagy, cell repair, and actually makes your stem cells kind of rejuvenate a little bit. So it's really good. And it looks like it reduces age-related biomarkers and diseases. It improves lipids, blood pressure, insulin resistance, inflammation, weight, sleep, body comp. It reduces diabetes, dementia, cardiovascular disease, enhances immune function, improves cognitive function, may protect against neurodegeneration, mitigates and prevents autoimmunity, and may actually help improve response to and reduce toxicity of cancer therapies like chemo and radiation. So lots of benefits. What's really important is not just the fasting, but the refeeding. And this is really what people often don't take into account and don't understand. You have to refeed in the right way. So when you see a lot of the benefits, they come from the refeeding. So fasting followed by refeeding basically helps lead to autophagy and cell death, which is good for renewal and activation of stem cells, with regeneration of new cells replacing those senescent or damaged cells. It also rejuvenates hemopoietic and immune system cells and reduces inflammation. It helps neuronal stem cell regeneration, intestinal cells, and it works through IGF-1, mTOR, protein kinase A pathway. Essentially helps epigenetic reprogramming and reverses cognitive decline with aging. So basically, when you refeed, it's really important that you refeed in the right way, because that's what actually induces a lot of the benefits. Spermidine is sort of a calorie restriction mimetic, which you can take. It reverses age-related impairment of autophagy and increases nitric oxide and reduces some of these pathways. So let's get into each of the 4 longevity switches. Now, sugar is the biggest driver of deregulated insulin signaling in all its forms. And we see, when you have continuous feeding, you're going to be increasing insulin signaling, which it actually activates mTOR. It activates cell growth, cancer. It increases NF-kappa B and inflammation, and basically causes a whole series of problems. So we want to really understand how to regulate this by our diet, which is essentially a low glycemic diet, which is higher in fat and higher in fiber and lots of phytonutrients. And we know that when you have insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, it leads to all the disease of aging. It's the fundamental thing that goes wrong with type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and heart disease. The other key pathway is mTOR. And I'm going through this quickly because we only have a little bit of time, but we can get more into the discussion. But it's really just want to give you the highlights of what we're really understanding about these 4 longevity switches. Rapamycin is something that was developed as a drug for immunosuppression and other things that is used in transplant medicine, but it was discovered in Rapa Nui, and essentially it inhibits mTOR. Now, mTOR is a central regulator of lifespan and of aging. And there are 2 complexes, mTOR 1 and 2, and they're a little bit different. They're basically nutrient sensing, energy sensing, redox sensor, and they control protein synthesis. When mTOR is activated, it increases muscle protein synthesis, which is important for longevity. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it also, can stimulate cell growth, which can be good, proliferation, apoptosis, and may stimulate inflammation, but also influences cellular senescence and metabolism and stem cell function. When you inhibit mTOR, it increases lifespan in all animal models and all human models. And it regulates autophagy and protein synthesis. So basically, when you inhibit mTOR, you start autophagy. When you stimulate mTOR, you get protein synthesis. So it's not a good or bad. You need both. It's like, you can't just have one or the other. You need day and night. And essentially, often people who say we should, basically inhibit mTOR all the time by not eating any protein or having low protein or no animal protein kind of miss the point that we actually need muscle synthesis. Now, mTOR inhibition does a lot of good things. It induces autophagy, mitophagy, mitochondrial biogenesis. It preserves stem cell function. It reduces inflammation, inhibits NF-kappa B, which is the gene transcription factor for inflammation. It improves response to vaccinations in the elderly. It reduces the secretory associated senescent phenotype, which is the zombie cells that spew out inflammatory molecules. And rapamycin today is approved for transplant rejection, stent covering, and renal and pancreatic cancer, and because of how it works. Now, you really need to think about mTOR activation and mTOR inhibition both, because they're both necessary, and it's the timing and the way you regulate these pathways. So mTOR activation is activated by amino acids, particularly arginine and leucine, and leucine is the rate limiting amino acid for activating mTOR, which is needed for muscle protein synthesis. Also, glucose activates also carbohydrates activate mTOR. So if you're thinking of being a vegan, well, that's also, you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, so you're activating mTOR as well. Oxygen states high ATP AMP ratio, which is basically having lots of energy. Resistance training can activate mTOR, which actually is how you build muscle. And then when mTOR is inhibited, you get autophagy and mitophagy, which is basically caused by fasting or hypoxia or HIIT training. A lot of bioactives actually will inhibit mTOR, like urolithin A, which is from pomegranate, oleuropein from olive oil, coffee polyphenols, catechins from green tea, curcumin, berberine, which activates AMPK as well, resveratrol, quercetin. These are all things that we know in functional medicine have broad-ranging impacts as phytochemical signal transduction molecules. The inhibition of mTOR can be done through pharmacologic inhibition with rapamycin and rapalogs, which are analogs of rapamycin. Also hormesis, various kinds of hormesis or stress to the body. We'll talk about those. So, for example, pomegranate has urolithin A that's produced as a postbiotic from some of the polyphenols in pomegranate. And what's interesting is this is postbiotic because it's basically producing molecules by certain bacteria that then have broad-ranging effects in the body. Although many of us don't have those bacteria, so we often need to take it. It's basically a postbiotic from the alleged tannins from pomegranate, berries, and walnuts. It increases muscle endurance, muscle strength. It increases ATP production and VO2 max, independent of exercise, which is amazing. It reduces CRP, and improves metabolomic profiles, reduces sarcopenia, so helps with building muscle, important for aging, stimulates mitophagy and cellular cleanup, induces mitochondrial gene expression, inhibits mTOR, and upregulates SIRT1, which is important. We'll talk about that in a minute as one of the pathways for longevity and longevity switches. It improves T stem cell regulation, generation, and anti-tumor activity. So these are just examples of ways that we can regulate these various pathways. Rapamycin also is being explored as a potential therapy for longevity in animals. Probably not quite ready for prime time in humans, although it's definitely emerging. In animal models, it extends life even when started later in life, which is very impressive. Prevents or delays age-related cognitive decline, rejuvenates aging hearts, inhibits mTOR C1, which inhibits cellular proliferation in cancer, but inhibits both mTOR complex 1 and complex 2. Now, complex 2 inhibition is not good. That leads to immunosuppression and impaired glucose homeostasis. So when you have sustained mTOR complex 2 inhibition, you get into trouble. So there are selective mTOR complex 1 analogs and also intermittent dosing, which may achieve the same effect. And in studies, they found that different dosing regimens, for example, like weekly dosing rather than daily dosing, may not have that same effect. And some people are taking 6 milligrams a week. And there are also rapalogs that are there for selective mTOR complex 1 inhibition. But the mTOR paradox is important to understand. This whole idea of autophagy versus protein synthesis. It's this sort of this Goldilocks really effect of not too much, not too little. So sarcopenia is really one of the major drivers of decline as we age. We lose muscle. Our muscle is really our metabolic engine. We become more insulin resistant. We have lower growth hormone, higher insulin resistance, more inflammation, lower sex hormones, higher cortisol as we lose muscle. It's not just that it makes us frail and weak. It has a lot of downstream metabolic effects. And preserving and maintaining high quality muscle as we age is one of the key factors for actually living a long, productive, healthy, and functional life. So when you have inadequate protein intake, you get sarcopenia. As we age, we basically get, anabolic resistance. We need more protein, and we have less ability to use the protein we eat. And so we basically have to have more protein. And that leads to, if we have less protein as we age, we lose function. This is Emma Morano, who basically was in her 90s told by her doctor to eat 150 grams of meat a day because she was having weakness and was dwindling. She ended up living to be 117 years old. So I don't think the meat killed her. So having the right kind of protein is important. Leucine is critical for muscle protein synthesis, and plant proteins are very low in leucine. They can be supplemented, they can be jacked up with amino acids, but the key here is to make sure you're getting enough stimulation of mTOR in the right time, particularly in the morning. So fasting overnight followed by a protein load in the morning is the best way to activate mTOR. So protein requirements change with age. This is a large review paper based on a ProAge study group, which is all the protein experts in the world got together and go, what do we know? And essentially they found that it's more probably like, rather than 0.8 grams per kilo, it's probably almost like a gram per pound as we get older. And the anabolic resistance requires probably 1.2 to 2 grams per kilo, sometimes more depending on your activity. The RDA is basically just the minimum needed to prevent deficiency disease, not the maximum amount needed for health. The anabolic threshold for people over 65 is probably 25 to 40 grams with about 2.5 to 2.8 grams of leucine. So you got to make sure you're getting that leucine. You make sure you have the quality proteins right. That's really important. And usually about an hour or two after exercise, within an hour or two. Animal protein is also higher in creatine and leucine, so much more effective. Whey protein is probably the best source of high quality protein for muscle synthesis. Plant proteins are much lower in leucine and require supplementation with branched chain amino acids and creatine. They looked at sarcopenia and animal versus plant protein, and animal protein basically won hands down versus plant protein for supporting lean muscle mass and muscle strength. Next nutrient signaling pathway is AMPK, and this is insulin and mTOR detect excess of nutrients and then get stimulated. AMPK and sirtuins are detecting scarcity. So when resources are scarce, they get activated, and AMPK can be activated by low levels of AMP, which is adenosine monophosphate. As we use ATP, it becomes AMP, and that's a clue that the body needs more energy. Exercise, fasting, all will activate AMPK, and that has broad range effects across many of these pathways. And you can see the many redundant pathways here. There's like many redundant pathways among all these 4 longevity switches, and they all do a lot of the same things, like inhibition of mTOR and autophagy and mitophagy and inhibition of inflammation of kappa B and mitochondrial biogenesis and many things we want to have happen. So basically, AMPK can be very good in improving all the things we need when we want to live a long time. It's a key signaling pathway. It's a fuel sensing enzyme. It's activated by low energy states. It's inhibited by too much insulin, sugar, and high energy states. It improves mitochondrial energy production. It reverses insulin resistance. It enhances stress resistance. It extends lifespan. In animal models, it controls autophagy. It stimulates FOXO and DAF16, NRF2, and SIRT1 signaling pathways, all related to oxidative stress and mitochondrial function and DNA repair. Inhibits NF-kappa B, with suppressing inflammation. That's a gene transcription factor that activates inflammation. And as we get older, the signaling declines. We need more stimulation, and we get impaired metabolism, increased reactive oxygen species, and autophagy as AMPK's function declines. So there's a lot of sort of data on all these pathways, but it's really interesting when you activate AMPK, you get P53 tumor suppressor genes turn on, so you limit cancer, you limit inflammation, you limit oxidative stress, you increase autophagy, increase mitophagy, DNA repair by activating SIRT1. And many phytochemicals work on this as well. So what should we be doing to do this? Quercetin is a great AMPK activator, which is available through supplements, and I think HTB Rejuvenate, the Himalayan tartary buckwheat's very high in this as well. So Himalayan tartary buckwheat's a great source of these phytochemicals, but they're also in other things, in berries and other foods. Can be found in berberine as well, bitter melon. Exercise will also activate uh, AMPK, resistance training, saunas, hormesis, all can activate AMPK. But then many people are talking about using metformin as a way to activate AMPK for longevity, but I do have some concerns about it. It does work in many ways by improving hepatic insulin sensitivity and reduces glucose absorption and activates AMPK, inhibits advanced glycation end products by inhibiting NF-kappa B, and it may help microbiome health, which may be part of how it works. It also activates SIRT1, which we'll learn in a minute, actually is involved in DNA repair, and inhibits mTOR. All sounds great, but it also inhibits mitochondrial complex 1, which I think is a concern for me. And when you look at studies on exercise, it basically, the bottom line here is that when you give metformin, your response to exercise and progressive resistance training is diminished, and you get less muscle strength, less hypertrophy, and you don't get the benefits of exercise, which is concerning to me because of how important muscle is. And there's a lot of data. There's a couple of observational data studies that actually show the exact opposite. One shows benefit, one showed actually worsening of mortality. So I think with the data still out, there's a large trial coming out called the TAME trial, and the study design is noted here. But essentially, they're doing a randomized controlled trial with 3,000 people, seeing if metformin improves aging. It's targeting aging with metformin. That's what the TAME trial is, and they've been looking at all the secondary and tertiary outcomes. But lifestyle works far better than metformin. This is from the diabetes prevention trial. This was even a crappy diet, which was a low-fat diet, which was not ideal for preventing pre-diabetes, but it's what they use, and it still worked better than metformin. Lastly is sirtuins. Sirtuins are really important, and they're involved in DNA repair. You might have heard about the NAD or resveratrol. These are things that act on sirtuins, and a lot of the work of David Sinclair and Leonard Gorty at MIT was involved in mapping these out. But many things will activate sirtuins: calorie restriction, exercise, phytochemicals like resveratrol, quercetin, NAD, and it all works on these pathways of longevity. So curcumin and resveratrol, they're basically a family of NAD dependent deacetylation enzymes that regulate gene transcription. They stimulate autophagy by mTOR inhibition. They reduce cancer via activation of the p53 tumor suppression gene. They send out DNA repair enzymes all over the place and helps our epigenetic reprogramming and inhibits inflammation, reduces oxidative stress by activating FOXO, and increases NRF2, which activates all our antioxidant enzyme pathways like SOD and catalases. It improves insulin sensitivity. It improves mitochondrial biogenesis. It helps regulate circadian clocks. So it's a large family of signaling proteins, but they're very much influenced by our diet and lifestyle. And when you properly regulate these, you actually do all the things you want to do to live a long, healthy life. It increases brown fat activation, improves insulin sensitivity, improves exercise performance, fatty liver, endothelial function, cardiac function, neurodegeneration, and all the innate longevity pathways. It's reduced with aging. It's impaired by sugar and starch, caloric excess. And to activate it, you basically can use calorie restriction, exercise, hypoxia, hot and cold stress like saunas and cold plunges. NAD is key, and a lot of people are using NAD to activate this. And there's a lot of work on NMN, NR, NAD that's going on right now. We're still sort of waiting to see how it all comes out, but I think it's very promising. And phytohormesis, which are these plant molecules that we can consume that actually help also to increase sirtuin expression, like resveratrol, quercetin, persimmons, curcumin, catechins, cruciferous vegetables, lychees, my favorite, even melatonin. NAD is probably one of the most effective things. And so this is a lot of research is focused on NAD and NMN and NR and other biomolecules that may help to activate sirtuins. And NR and NMN are precursors of NAD, and they activate sirtuins and improve DNA repair, energy production, telomere lengthening, neurogenesis and plasticity, inhibiting inflammation, optimize mitochondrial function, improves metabolism, exercise performance. So you can see all these things work in the same way, these fundamental pathways that address the hallmarks of aging that are so key. And they make mouse run a lot longer when you take NAD too. So a lot of therapeutic uses. You can do IV, you can do sub-Q, oral, and there's still a lot of work going on to sort of sort out what's going on. I think lastly, just to close, I think we're entering an age of scientific wellness, and this is Leroy Hood, who's one of the pioneers with Nathan Price about this concept of personalized, predictive, data-rich analysis in our hands. And I think we're going to be using deep phenotyping to track all of our um, uh, deep phenotyping. So we look at genomics, metabolome, microbiome, literally thousands of metabolites, wearable sensors that we have now, and advanced sensors. They're going to look at, maybe over 1,000 metabolites through your skin, and check out different biomarkers that we can track that are really important for longevity, including lots of functional medicine testing, obviously, DNA methylation testing, liquid biopsies. David Furman at Stanford has developed an immune age test, which is be emerging soon to look at cytokines that are correlated with longevity, quantified self data. I co-founded a new company called Function, which is really bringing together the ability for people to access their own lab testing with deep AI and machine learning on the back end, informed by functional medicine, deep phenotyping of people, which is really pretty fun. So the future is here. I think I don't have time to go through much more around what's happening, but just quickly, regenerative medicine, I think, is also part of the story, and using our understanding of activating the body's innate repair systems using products and things that our body already uses, whether it's nutrients, NAD, which we make, ozone, which body makes, hyperbaric oxygen, stem cells, exosomes, peptides, plasmapheresis, which is actually plasma exchange can be very effective for longevity. Natural killer cell therapy, regenerative medicine injections. And so we're basically entering a pretty fun era where we're going to be seeing a real radical shift in our understanding of health and disease based on this emerging scientific understanding of the hallmarks of aging, and combining those with systems medicine, network medicine, functional medicine to create a whole new framework of where we're headed in the future. So I really enjoyed sharing with all of you. Hopefully it was a little overwhelming, but you got the slides, you can learn about it, and we will have a chance to talk about it in the panel. Thank you.
All right, well, I am so excited to be here with you all to be talking about three of my favorite topics: about the plant kingdom, about food, and about the immune system, and how these things come together. Because the truth of the matter is, the longer I'm around, the more time I spend learning about the state of the planet, the state of human health, the more I appreciate that we cannot continue to silo human health into its own bucket, that the health of humans is connected to the health of the planet, and that the immune system turns out to be one of the most remarkable ways to bridge this gap, to help us to understand how everything we do is interconnected. So I started my career in internal medicine with the idea that I would just get really good at understanding and managing chronic diseases in adults. And now I appreciate that the bigger picture actually requires me to understand the soil microbiome and how nutrients transfer between systems, leading to immune effects between humans, between microbes, and between plants. So with that as a preamble, I suppose, let's go ahead and get into this conversation: nutrition, plant bioactives, and immune rejuvenation. So let's start with some big picture learning points. We're going to be talking about the intersection of human aging, immune aging, and how that maps onto various conditions, diseases, disabilities that are associated with aging. We'll talk about how we can rejuvenate our immune systems and how that is actually a key pathway involved in helping to offset some of the negative effects associated with aging. And then we'll talk in particular about why biodiversity is a key part of this equation, and how biodiversity is actually a way to rejuvenate immunity. And we'll talk about how biodiversity exists in the context of the microbiome, in the context of our diet, and we'll talk about how that is then influencing multiple areas of personal and global health, as well as the immune system. Now, we know that we're all getting older. It's kind of intrinsic to what it means to be alive, but it's important to note that beyond just getting older with each passing day, we as a population are growing older. And so recent statistics basically highlight this in demonstrating that by the year 2050, the global population of people aged 60 years or older is going to double to over 2 billion, while the population of people aged 80 or older will triple to over 400 million. Why does that matter? Now, certainly as we age, we gain perspective, and there are many things that actually improve. But by and large, we're also more susceptible to chronic diseases as well as disability from those diseases. And that's important because it relates directly to the immune system, and these are modifiable diseases. There are things that we can do related to nutrition and other interventions to help bring the immune system back into a state of relative balance and decrease our chances of having to deal with these conditions as well as the disability that they create. So how does aging correlate with changes in the immune system? We know that as the years go on, as our chronological age or our age in birthdays gets bigger, that our immune system ages too, and that this aging of the immune system, this relative bias of the immune system towards an age state, is thought to be a central driver of the aging process, so meaning how old we are as far as how we feel, our speed of actual aging, not just in years, but how our cells experience aging, is a direct reflection of how quickly our immune system ages. And in addition, we know that an aged immune system predicts increased morbidity and mortality relative to somebody whose immune system is aging slower. So as I've just said, an aged immune system or aging immune cells promote aging across the body, and that an aging immune system contributes to age-related disease and disability. This brings us to an important point, which is that if we can rejuvenate and maintain our immune resilience, then that is actually a powerful strategy for promoting longevity as well as health span, which I think is probably the more important metric. It's not so important for us to live really long lives if the quality of those years is not so good. Health span brings into this conversation an additional variable, which is healthy years. We know that if you look at people who are older, who have successfully aged, we know that they have different immune systems from people who are not as successful in aging and die earlier. So researchers have tested this, and a number of recent publications as well as associated news stories have come out on this subject, basically showing that as we age, our immune system changes, and certain patterns of immune system activation are predictive of longer years. This is really interesting stuff, and highly recommend, if you haven't already investigated this, you check it out, because really what we're talking about here is that one of the central drivers of healthy aging is how your immune system is programmed over your lifespan. So that is kind of an impetus to a question, which is, if we're going to go beyond the basics, how do we go bigger? How do we get to a larger conversation around what we can do to enhance our immune resilience today? And here I want to propose something, and that is the most resilient immune system that we can have necessitates more than just what comes from within us, meaning our ability to form the most resilient immune system possible requires us to reconceptualize ourselves as more than just our own cells. So what the heck am I talking about here? Our immune resilience is a reflection of a larger network of which we are just one part, and a small part. It is a reflection of the overall biodiversity that exists in the environment around us, as well as the environment within us. Our immune resilience is just a small piece of this larger picture of global immune resilience. The environment, the ecosystem's ability to be resilient to all sorts of threats and challenges. But I think at a more granular level, we need to be thinking about our immune resilience as a direct manifestation of biodiversity. And that's the diversity and the makeup of the microbes that live on and in us, as well as the diversity and the makeup of the nutrients in our food. And we'll talk about how that is being modified by the larger environment we find ourselves in now. Let's ask a question, which is, what happens to a person if we simply expose them to a more diverse and naturally diverse environment? We see multiple studies showing that when you take people, in particular children, and just give them access to more natural elements, that it changes their immune system, that it changes their microbiome. So the biodiversity in our immediate vicinity has a direct effect on our microbiome and our immune system. What does this actually look like based on the research? Here's the first study I want to talk about, and it's called Long-Term Biodiversity Intervention Shapes Health-Associated Commensal Microbiota Among Urban Daycare Children. In this study that was conducted over 2 years across a number of different daycare centers, they put kids into two different arms. One arm was the standardized group. They went outside into their daycare centers and interacted with kind of a standardized outside. So playground type area, places to play, but not necessarily a ton of additional nature exposure. And in the other group, they put forest floor vegetation outside as well as sod. And the goal here was to bring in natural elements, not just for the look, but rather for the actual interaction with these natural elements. They looked at the bacterial community in the soil in the outside of these daycare centers, and they looked at the bacterial community in the mouth, the skin, and the gut of these children. What they found was remarkable. So first of all, there were changes in the microbiome of the surface soil. So bringing in these natural elements to the outside of these daycare centers changed the soil microbiome. But they also found that there were enduring changes in the microbiome as measured in children's skin, saliva, and gut microbiome. These changes are associated with immune outcomes. And we'll talk about this in the next study, but these are all things that we know from the interactions between the microbiome and the immune system are directly related to immune system outcomes. Now let's explore the second study. This was published in the journal Science Advances, which is a publication of science, obviously a well-respected journal. They were looking at a similar type of intervention, but over a much shorter timeline. So in this study, in comparison to the last study, it was a much shorter window, only 1 month. But similarly, they looked at changes in the skin and the gut microbiome of daycare children who were exposed to a nature-focused intervention. Different from the last study, however, they also looked at immune parameters. They looked at blood immune markers, and they looked at how that correlated with changes in the microbiome. They did this study in some urban centers, so it wasn't as though these kids some groups were living out in the countryside. Actually, the two major groups were both from urban centers, and one group they had continue with the standard playing outside in the urban type of backyard. The other group had a bunch of forest elements brought into the school playground, so pieces of trees, leaves, dirt, sod. And they also standardized to some extent by having a positive control. So these were kids coming from a forest-based school to see whether these changes were something that were similar to what you saw in children from a forest-based school. What they found in this study, similar to the last study, is that this intervention group, the one who had access to these natural elements, had statistically significant changes in their skin and gut microbiome. But new information here, they found that those changes specifically in the skin microbiome correlated with changes in plasma interleukin 17A levels. They also found that in the intervention group, there were changes in the ratio of IL-10 to IL-17. Specifically, the ratio increased, which, depending on how you slice it, could be seen as an indicator of a less inflammatory immune state. One of the learnings from these types of papers, which is, I guess, pretty well understood by many of you and many people who have been thinking about this for some time, is that the microbes that are around us shape the microbes that live in and on us. And we've often looked at this from the perspective of the gut microbiome and basically said, well, if we're taking a probiotic, then obviously that should change the gut microbiome. If we do something like consume an antibiotic, that will change the gut microbiome. But if we dive into this in a little bit more detail, we can ask a question, which is, where else are the microbes that are shaping us, that are colonizing us, that are changing our own microbiome coming from? And one of the places where our microbiome is being shaped and where our health is being shaped is the soil microbiome. This is a really interesting graphic that comes from the study that I just brought up, Soil Microbiomes in One Health, basically showing that what we have here is an ecosystem-wide transfer of microbiota from soil to plants to animals to people. Now, why does that matter? We'll discuss that in a moment, but realize that we are living in a system in which we are sharing, even between an individual person and the environment, trillions of microbes that are being programmed by and exchanged between these different groups of organisms, as well as the ecosystem as a whole. That's really important when we start to think about, well, what is the health of the microbiome, not just of ourselves and our gut, but what is the health of the microbiome of our soil, of our animals, of the plants that we are consuming? I want to cover just a couple of the major ideas around this concept that the microbes around us play a major role in our health. We've heard people reference these hypotheses like the old friends hypothesis, the biophilia hypothesis, the biodiversity hypothesis, all of which reference this idea that, in essence, being exposed to healthy microbes in our environment is key to overall wellness, especially to immune health and balance. We know that having a decreased diversity in the gut microbiome is a risk factor for a number of immune-related issues, up into the point of developing immune-related diseases. We also know, as we've said, that the human microbiome is impacted by the environmental biodiversity. So being exposed to diverse microbes in a natural setting seems like it is an important part of what programs our own microbiome towards balance and therefore towards immune resilience. Now, a question that I was never asked in my training, but one that seems to be increasingly relevant to all of us, is that the soil microbiome may influence health, but how? Why should we care about the soil microbiome in particular as it relates to immune wellness? And I'll give you a couple of important reasons. The first one is that the soil microbiome impacts the nutritional content of the plants grown in that soil. And so as we look at rates of people getting adequate numbers of vitamins and minerals and polyphenolics from their food, and we think about, well, what can we do to enhance the content of those nutrients in our food? Having a healthier soil microbiome turns out to be an important part of that conversation. Similarly, we know that the nutritional content of animals is contingent on the food that they eat, and the food that they eat tends to be plants. So the plants being grown in soil with a healthier soil microbiome by extension translates into healthier animals, and if we're eating those animals, better nutrition for us. We also know that a healthier soil microbiome translates into enhancements in global ecosystem health. So it's not just about, what is the local animal going to benefit or the local plant going to benefit, but rather we create a reservoir of diversity and nutritional flux and nutritional flow that benefits the overall ecosystem. We know that having a more diverse soil microbiome may actually translate into a more diverse plant microbiome, which actually could help us to have exposure to additional pro and prebiotics. Specifically in the probiotic context, as we'll discuss in a moment, we may get a transfer of healthy microbes from the soil on the plants that we consume from that soil. We also know that moving forward and looking at some of the scientific advancement needs in this field, that as we better understand the soil microbiome, as we've just said, it influences the nutritional content of plants that we grow in said soil, that we may be able to enhance the nutritional content of our plants by preferentially promoting a biodiverse soil, or even selecting for microbes that can allow for that soil to better enhance the nutrition of the plants that are grown in that soil. And I think that that is a great representation of this conversation of how food is medicine can merge with biotechnology in a sustainable way. I believe we're all accustomed to this idea that when we eat certain foods that contain bacteria, fermented foods, that they may benefit us by inoculating our gut microbiome and changing its composition. But then this paper came out back in 2021, which suggested that the impact of the microbiome of the foods that we eat on our health may be so much more significant. And this really brings together so many concepts. It helps to connect the idea of the soil microbiome with changes in our microbiome, as well as with changes in our immune system. This paper was entitled "The Edible Plant Microbiome Represents a Diverse Genetic Reservoir with Functional Potential in the Human Host," and it was published in Nature Scientific Reports back in 2021. What were some of the most important takeaways from this seminal paper? The first one is that we have not paid nearly enough attention to the role of the microbiomes on the food that we eat. It isn't just about adding bacteria to yogurt and then consuming those bacteria. What we're talking about here is that in nature, everything is coated with a microbiome, and when we eat certain foods, specifically, let's say, fruits, vegetables, and other foods from nature that haven't been chemically treated, we are actually consuming a whole lot of microbes. So what they did in this study is they used metagenomics and they analyzed the microbiomes of many common foods. They found that there was a high diversity as well as functional diversity of the bacteria that were living on the foods that we eat. And they proposed that these bacteria may contribute both to the gut microbiome and may influence human health. Now, this is a paradigm shifting concept because what we're doing here is connecting the soil microbiome with human health and by extension with human immune health. What we're saying is that depending on how and where your food was grown, you are getting access to a wide range of microbes that we believe can program your gut microbiome, can program multiple microbiomes in your body, and may program your immune system. So food is medicine in so much of a larger way than just the basic vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients that we've been taught. So let's put all of this together because it does get a little bit novel and potentially a little bit technical. We've known for some time that the human microbiome is influenced by microbes in our environment. And that's obviously the case, right? If we get an infection, we're literally altering our microbiome. But now what we're understanding is that the human microbiome is being governed by, influenced by the microbiome, not just in the negative sense, but rather in a positive sense by the dietary as well as environmental microbes that we're being exposed to. Taking that one step further, we know now that it's not just about the microbiome or the microbes that are put into fermented foods, the things that we commonly see in the grocery store promoted as probiotics, but rather that the food that we eat by virtue of the microbes that it obtains from the soil and its local environment is actually a dynamic and important source of microbes that can enhance or detract from our overall health. And when we understand that the immune system is being programmed moment to moment by our gut microbiome in particular, we appreciate that by modifying the microbiome of the soil and by extension of the plants that we eat, the animals that we consume by virtue of nutrient transfer, we are actually playing a significant role in modifying our immune system. We can start to see how all of these things begin to come together in a way that we really haven't thought about until quite recently. So mostly we've been talking about the role of the soil microbiome, the microbiome as a whole, and diversity of the microbes within us, diversity of the microbes we consume, as a pathway towards enhanced immune resilience. But let's now shift and talk about the importance of biodiverse food and why food helps program our immune system towards a relative state of resilience or a relative state of poor immune health. Let's focus first on this question, which is how does the biodiversity of our food impact the health of our immune system, specifically the resilience of our immune system? Well, one powerful pathway relates to what we've just described, which is having a more diverse diet, rich in a variety of different nutrients, predicts a more diverse and resilient gut microbiome. And when we understand that the vast majority, 70+% of our immune system lives in the gut where it is being actively modified by, educated by the gut microbiome, we see how the effect of dietary nutrients on the gut microbiome is a direct conduit towards a more resilient immune system. At a very basic level, we know that we need a diversity of nutrients in our diet. Specifically, we need to make sure we get the right macro and micronutrients, because we know that without these, we can develop a overt deficiency. We know that deficient states like vitamin C deficiency, vitamin B deficiency are very clearly tethered to worse immune resilience as well as diseases. So we understand here that having foods that are rich in a diversity of nutrients is a clear protective factor for immune wellness. How do you do that? Well, it's eating a diversity of foods. We appreciate increasingly the role of polyphenolics, polyphenols found in our foods, and how this may modify the gut microbiome and drive an improved balance and therefore an enhanced resilience in our immune system. Polyphenols, historically looked at as antioxidants, now understood to have a prebiotic effect by modifying the gut microbiome and seem to program the immune system towards a state of better resilience. And we know that how do we get a diverse set of polyphenols in our diet? Well, it's eating a diverse group of plant-based foods. We also know that if we were to look at solutions moving forward for the health concerns of our current population as well as our future population, that the more plants we have available, the higher the chances are of us finding novel immune healing molecules. Most diseases these days have at least some element of immune dysfunction and imbalance underlying them. And when we understand that having access to more potential solutions in the form of various plants, both as food as medicine as well as simply pharmaceuticals, we understand then that having access to biodiverse plants, and in particular, I suppose, those that can be converted into food, is incredibly important. So now let's talk about a case study that helps to teach us about what these practices look like in the real world. This is a plant called Himalayan tartary buckwheat, or tartary buckwheat, and it's a plant that historically we've thought about as very special because it can survive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Literally, it can survive at the top of mountains with incredible UV radiation, and it seems to thrive under these conditions. Now, not unexpectedly, I suppose, plants like tartary buckwheat were popular back in the day because they were so hardy. Our founding fathers grew buckwheat, but as time went on, we largely replaced crops like tartary buckwheat with wheat and soy and corn because they were easier to basically be palatable since they were not so bitter. Why is tartary buckwheat so bitter? It's because it's packed with polyphenolics, especially flavonoids. And we know that based on some of the testing that we've seen in the literature, that depending on the tartary buckwheat sample you look at, it can actually have thousands of times more of polyphenolics like rutin compared to common buckwheat. It's actually the only field crop known that has high rutin concentrations. And when we look at what the associations are between consumption of tartary buckwheat and human outcomes, we can see that people who have used tartary buckwheat in place of conventional flours appear to have decreased fatigue, better glycemic control, better weight loss, and may also have improvements in immune markers. So this is a very unique food as medicine crop because it is something that has both elements of food and medicine because it is so rich in some of these polyphenolics. Now, I want to stress this again. There are reasons why crops like Himalayan tartary buckwheat have fallen out of fashion. But as we're looking at the data that I just presented as to why we need to be fostering more biodiversity, more diversity in the foods that we eat, everything about this crop is why that is important. Because we need to be eating a more diverse range of nutrients, because we need to be eating, in particular, the families of nutrients like polyphenolics that have largely been kind of extracted from many of the foods that we see in the grocery store. As we look at some of the value of this crop, beyond just the nutrition that it provides to humans that may be beneficial to the immune system, it's interesting that this crop is now being heralded as maybe one of the most important possible types of crops to promote biodiversity. Now, if you look at tartary buckwheat versus common buckwheat, you'll see there are a number of differences in the way that these plants look. Tartary buckwheat is a much more hardy crop than is common buckwheat. And when you look at the seeds, when you look at how it grows, when you look at the polyphenolics that it produces, it's really night and day. So how is buckwheat such a good example of a type of crop that we should be looking at to enhance biodiversity while simultaneously providing excellent nutrition to humans who consume it. Here's just a couple of the ways from a farm-based perspective it becomes so important. Buckwheat is a great cover crop. It helps to smother out weeds because it grows so quickly. It can be used as a nurse crop or a companion crop. It also does great things with loosening and aerating the soil. It can be used as a rotation crop. It's a great pollinator. And in addition, it has great organic potential because especially Tartary buckwheat is so hardy that it doesn't really necessitate much in the way of pesticides. So this is an important part of this conversation in particular because, as we've discussed before, part of our goal is to preserve and enhance the health of the soil microbiome. Turns out, which I'm sure you all know, if you treat the soil with pesticides, if you treat the soil with chemicals, you're basically doing to that soil microbiome what antibiotics do to the gut microbiome. So in many ways, this plant, Tartary buckwheat, does great things in that it provides the human microbiome and human immune system with the signals it needs for increased resilience. But at the level of the soil, the growth of this crop does great things for the health of the soil microbiome and for general enhancement of the biodiversity of the environment in which it's grown. The nutrients found in Tartary buckwheat, and I would use that term a little bit more broadly because I would say it's not just the macro and micronutrients, but also the phytochemical phytonutrients, including polyphenolics, as well as the fiber in Tartary buckwheat, are all believed to have positive effects on the microbiome. Now, one of our goals is to better elucidate what these mechanisms look like in real humans, not just in animals. And so if you attended the TLC, you heard me present on this study. It's something that we're actively in the process of publishing. And what we're trying to look at here is when you take the polyphenols represented in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat and provide them to healthy people for a 90-day period, what does it do to their immune-related parameters? We found a number of changes that were very interesting in a variety of immune-related parameters in the study group. And so we'll be talking about this in a number of upcoming presentations. But the point here being that as we're looking at this spectrum of what happens to soil microbiomes, to plant changes, to human changes, and then all the way up to human immune changes, this is helping to connect some of these dots. So, with all of this said, I want to leave you with some actionables. What do we do to help protect soil health, to help protect biodiversity in plants, in the soil microbiome, to help promote flourishing of humans by way of an improved immune resilience? One of the best and easiest things that all of us can do to support the health that I've described across the ecosystem from soil microbiome all the way up into human immune resilience is simply to advocate for in our communities, in our patients, in our friends and family, as well as for ourselves, the consumption of a diversity of nutrient-dense heirloom-type plants. Why is that the case? Well, we know that ancient and traditionally cultivated plants tend to be higher in diverse and unique nutrients. Secondarily, when we choose to purchase these types of foods, we're actually supporting farmers who tend to care more for the earth, tend to care more for the soil health. If we're supporting somebody who is growing heirloom plants, they're less likely to do monocropping practices, perhaps more likely not to use pesticides and other things that may damage the soil microbiome. So at a basic level here, what we're talking about is promotion of eating diverse and nutrient-rich foods. You can do that in your grocery store. You can do that by supporting locally grown foods and seasonal eating. That, in addition, supports more sustainable practices in the way that food is grown, as well as a more diverse nutrient profile in the foods that you're eating. Another thing that we can all be doing is to enhance biodiversity through soil-specific intervention. So what do you do to actually enhance the health of the soil? Well, one of the most basic strategies here is simply to look at brands that are supporting regenerative agriculture. And this is early work. So the work in regenerative agriculture certainly is not early as it relates to people applying these practices. But as we look at certifications for regenerative agriculture, we're still relatively early in that conversation. One of the ways that you can do this is simply to buy organic when possible. We know that when people farm organic, that it tends to increase the species richness and abundance of local species in those regions where organic farming is occurring. So this is actually a great way to support soil health, is simply to support organic, because organic farming doesn't use as many of the chemicals that can be damaging to the soil microbiome. I will say, moving forward, we're looking at certifications like ROC that can indicate to us that somebody is going beyond just organic and is in fact doing things that may be linked to a better health of the soil in which they are growing their crops. Now, we can't talk about biodiversity and enhancing immune wellness without talking about the gut microbiome. We know from a variety of studies that the gut microbiome is critically involved in multiple aspects of our health, but especially our immune wellness. And we also know that we can modify the biodiversity and the wellness of our gut microbiome through simple dietary strategies. So at a basic level, consuming a diversity of plant-based foods is a great way to support a healthy gut microbiome. In addition, on the flip side, avoiding foods that have been heavily processed, added sugar, preservatives, is a nice way to support the overall health of the gut microbiome and the biodiversity of the gut microbiome. Now, as it relates to including foods that either contain pre or probiotics, I will say that in the prebiotics category, we've now understood that it's not just about the fiber, but it's also about the polyphenols in our food. How do you enhance a diversity of polyphenols in your diet? Well, you eat a diversity of colorful plant-based foods, fruits and vegetables. You prioritize spices that are especially rich in polyphenols. Coffee and tea doesn't have to be caffeinated, are also great sources of polyphenolics in our diet. As it relates to the probiotics, so there's certainly a lot to be said about individual strains of probiotics for immune wellness. But what I really think is the case here is that we will soon recognize that the way our food is grown is actually going to have a direct effect on the probiotics on that food. As we saw in the study I presented a few slides back, we know that our food is covered in microbes, and those microbes may have an effect on our overall health and our immune health. So in the interim, I think this is a great way to promote the idea that eating organic and eating local are actually better for your gut health and your gut biodiversity than we anticipated, because you are actually getting a source of naturally, locally occurring microbes when you eat those foods. And as I mentioned, consuming more diverse polyphenolics as a prebiotic intervention probably makes sense, but we also know that this may actually enhance the biodiversity of the microbiome, and in particular, that when we eat certain polyphenols, it may actually bring the overall makeup of the gut microbiome towards a healthier state. So, as I've said, consuming more diversity of polyphenolics as well as more polyphenols in general seems like it's a good strategy to support overall gut health and immune resilience. And I'll just bring this up as a couple of the recent papers that we've seen here connecting the gut microbiome with age-related immune dysfunction, which is again kind of a key topic here in this Big Bowl Health sponsored PLMI event. So these are papers that have just been published in the last years, but just to give you a sample of this, we now understand that the microbiome is key to driving many of the processes that are involved with longevity. And when we look at what is happening here at the level of the connection between the immune system and the microbiome, we see that the microbiome in this paper published over here in the journal Blood can actually influence inflammaging, basically age-related inflammation, as a function of immune-related parameters. So the microbiome appears to modify the immune system, which then modifies immune-related aging. Really interesting stuff. And the final paper here you'll see on the bottom is just the idea that if we influence the gut microbiome towards a more positive place, then we may actually be able to reverse certain aspects of, or at least slow the rate of progression of certain aspects of aging. So what are the takeaways from this conversation? We've covered a lot of topics, and certainly not all of them in the level of depth that I think many of you might want, because these are interesting but also complex topics. The first thing to remember is that immune aging is a central driver of death and disability. Specifically, aging of the immune system translates into higher risk for chronic age-related diseases. We know that we have trillions of immune systems within us, but it's not just about our immune programming. We have to think about what are the things that are influencing our immune programming, not just the cells themselves, but the data that these cells are being fed that modifies their function. We know that biodiversity in our natural environment, being exposed to or getting exposure to nature, is a way to program our immune system, and likely by way of the microbiome. As we think about this in practice, we can think about any strategy that enhances the diversity in our soil, in our food, and in our microbiome as ways to promote enhanced immune resilience and potentially to help offset some of these issues associated with immune-related aging. How do we do this? Well, at a very basic level, we prioritize a diversity of dietary nutrients. We prioritize the diversity and health of our microbiome. And by doing this, we may have a great shot at being able to rejuvenate our immune system. In doing so, reverse and prevent many of the most important drivers of death and disability today. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and here are a couple of ways to get in touch with me and learn more.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rob Silverman, Amazon best-selling author of Immune Reboot. I'm excited and honored to be here and spend the next 30 to 35 minutes with you, sharing some key insights on how you can reboot your immune system to enable you to unlock your longevity potential. It has been stated that the key to longevity is turning on the health switches. I believe that their master switch for longevity is having a robust and a resilient immune system. Let's break that down a little bit. I wholeheartedly agree about flicking the health switches. I believe that you're going to be turning on certain sirtuins, AMPK pathway, and dimming. You're not just you're going to turn on, but you can dim certain pathways like mTOR pathway. mTOR pathway is a protein synthesis pathway, so it's more for survival than for growth. So we may not want to turn everything on. So it's the balance of these health switches that are so vital. When you're able to turn on the right switches and turn off the correct switches and balance them, you're going to turn on the Christmas tree of health. Again, for me, that strong, robust, powerful immune system is critical, but its resiliency, its flexibility, its adaptability is going to be very unique now in the American population. People ask me all the time to define longevity. Longevity is a lifespan versus health span. Well, what's the difference? Well, clearly lifespan is if you live to 80 years old, that's your lifespan. But if you're only healthy, or the real definition of health span is a lack of chronic disease to 60, you didn't have a good health span lifespan ratio. So what we're trying to do with some of the hacks that we're going to share is increase our lifespan, but dramatically also increase our health span to match. And in addition to that, I think one of the hidden gems in the idea of health span is vitality. So I'd like to live to 100 years old. I hope at 95, I'm able to go for a walk. I hope I'm not using a walker. I hope I'm still able to do certain exercise activities. That's my goal. I believe that's a very attainable goal, a foreseeable goal. So again, lifespan versus health span. But in health span, we do want to avoid the chronic disease, but we want vitality. I want to be able to enjoy my life because I believe that health is wealth and there is no lottery ticket for health. This goes back to the concept of the hallmarks of aging. This was a breakthrough study which I adapted from 2013. The first hallmark of aging would be having a strong, robust immune system, being able to reboot your immune system to have immune health and immune resilience. And we'll go into more detail as we go through this presentation. Inflammation. My credo is to manage and modulate inflammation. I'm a big believer of that. And I believe that inflammation may be one of the backbones of why people have a poor lifespan and certainly a poor health span. Inflammation has been coined with aging, calling it inflammaging. This inflammation is wearing down our immune system, our adaptive and innate immune system, and not enabling us to produce certain defense mechanisms that are needed. So inflammation, without question, is a hallmark of aging. The microbiome, one of my favorite topics. The microbiome, all about the bacteria, all about the organisms that are living inside and on top of your body. The number one microbiome is your gut. We're going to talk about that. The number two microbiome, believe it or not, is your gums. And number three would be your skin. So we're going to have a great conversation about the microbiome and how we want to keep our ecosystem of microbiome with beneficial organisms. Mitochondrial dysfunction. We could probably do a whole presentation on mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondrial dysfunction is interesting in that it's the reason for the number one complaint going to a doctor's office, which is fatigue. Everybody knows that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It makes ATP. The inefficiency of making ATP causes fatigue. Most people don't realize that mitochondria have a secondary function, and that secondary function is to support the innate immune system. So when somebody gets sick and they're unable to ward off their pathogens, like a flu or a very bad flu, people usually get really tired. Your immune system can drain 55% of your mitochondrial function. After that, your mitochondria has something that's called cellular danger response. It's a switch, and that switch turns off all your ATP producing power plants. And then you're just totally exhausted. But it's a switch. It's like a light switch. The problem is to reset your mitochondria after your body goes through the process of warding off the flu. It's a 3-step process. Cellular danger response to turn it on is 3 steps. Each is a rate limiting step. So my question to everybody is, what have you done to help your mitochondria? Do you have the know-how? Do you have the nutrients to help your mitochondria turn on all 3 switches? And that's a critical element to avoid mitochondrial dysfunction, because once a mitochondria is dysfunctional, it's very hard to make it functional after that. Fascial injuries. I think you'll find this a tremendous breakthrough. Fascia, the saran wrap of the body. It's an intracellular communicator. It's the reason our body's able to hold its tone and tightness, because it adds to something called tensegrity. So fascial injuries are something that are growing in conversation. And I believe this may be a watershed moment for many listening, because fascia is the backbone of many of our musculoskeletal injuries. And fascia communicates with all other systems of the body, especially your central nervous system. Incidentally, there are 2 systems in the body that work 24/7, 365. They are your immune system and they are your central nervous system. Telomere shortenings, to me, they are the shoestring cap. They are the caps at the end of your chromosomes. Every time your cells divide, they shorten. At a certain point, when there's no more telomere, your cells die. So we want to slow the process down of telomere shortening. One of the biggest ways to do that is a good quality addition of a multivitamin, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D3, and believe it or not, having strong, potent, flexible T cells in your adaptive immune system. The loss of muscle mass. It has been said that muscle mass is the currency of longevity, and we'll delve into that. And compromised autophagy. You're going to get autophagy through intermittent fasting, proper intermittent fasting, and that will help you rid yourself of these zombies and senescent cells. So one of the most important things to understand when you're using some sort of interventions is, do you have biomarkers to know if you've done it correctly? Well, we do these interventions, we do these protocols, but the real question is, what are we basing? What is our baseline? I believe that the biomarkers of longevity are interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, and TNF-alpha. They are inflammatory biomarkers. These are things that are easy to test in any practitioner's office. For instance, interleukin-1 beta has a lot of soft tissue injuries, muscles, ligaments, and cartilage. Interleukin-6 and 8, interleukin-6 is the most dynamic interleukin in that it really measures all different kinds of inflammation. Interleukin-6 and 8, for instance, with my chiropractic background, would tell me that you probably have a predisposition to having a back injury. TNF-alpha, all inflammatory markers. C-reactive protein are tissue inflammation markers once again. Hemoglobin A1C. I'm all about blood sugar. I'm all about insulin response. Hemoglobin A1C lets everybody know the average of your blood sugar levels for 90 to 120 days with an emphasis on the last 30. And that emphasis is about 50% of the marker. APOE4. I wish we had more time to talk about it. I think everybody who's listening to me now should test for your APOE status and see if you have an APOE4. Let me expand on that. APOE2, if you have that, about 1% of the population does, your chances of Alzheimer's are virtually nil. APOE3, which is sort of neutral, like me, if my lifestyle isn't good, I'm going to go down the trek of possibly getting Alzheimer's, unfortunately, the sixth leading cause of death. If you have the APOE4, which about 25% of the population has, you have an 80% increased chance of getting Alzheimer's. So I'm a big believer in testing for it. And in any case, everybody should go on an anti-Alzheimer's diet, which is a longevity diet, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. And lastly, LPS, lipopolysaccharide. It is a major outer surface membrane component present in almost all gram-negative bacteria. Here's your gut. This is the inside of your gut. LPS holds gram-negative bacteria on the inside of your gut. When taking a blood serum test, if LPS is present, it tells you two things. LPS is an endotoxin, which can be damaging to different organs and different structures. LPS also implies that gram-negative bacteria is floating around in your bloodstream. 80% of gram-negative bacteria is pathogenic. Continue with the biomarkers. Lp(a), a cholesterol marker. Everybody should test for that as well. About 25% of the population, 22 to 25% of the population has it. It increases your incidence of heart disease. It's a genetic marker by 25 times. So everybody should test for this Lp(a). Blood pressure. Dr. Peter T has done a great job talking about blood pressure. I think it's a critical marker. Body composition. How are you going to know if you're putting muscle mass on? And it's not just muscle mass. It's muscle to fat ratio, I think, is really where you want to be. So a good body composition test will do that. We've talked about telomere length, VO2 max, your ability, your cardiovascular ability to burn oxygen, maximum grip strength. I always shake my patient's hands. I see that 75 to 80-year-old male and female, and they give me a strong handshake. I know they have grip strength. They have some muscle mass. They have some functional strength. Mitochondrial dysfunction, MDA and ROS are elevated levels of oxidative stress. MDA will lead you down a path of reactive oxygen species. So basically, these are blood markers to determine if you've got mitochondrial dysfunction. And lastly, zonulin. I'm going to go into greater detail with zonulin. Zonulin for me is not just a protein marker for a tight junction to imply that you have leaky gut. That's one. It's also an overall systemic marker. I believe that you're only as young as your immune system. So we can be on this earth for 72 years, but if we have an immune system of 40, we are 40 years old. If we're 40 years old or live 40 years on this earth, but we have an immune system of a 60-year-old, we are a 60-year-old person. So immunity, the key to immunity without question is the key to longevity, is immunity. Tufts University did a study and talked about people who lived to 100 and found out they had robust, resilient, flexible immune systems. The idea of immune resilience, it's a groundbreaking research study here that introduced the concept of resilience. It's actually a term that represents the ability to withstand and bounce back from infections and inflammatory stressors. It is not age dependent, but without question can affect lifespan and health outcomes. Most people talk about the immune system, but I don't see enough people talking about the 3 lines of defense in the immune system. Number one, the first line of defense is your barrier system. It's your skin and mucous membranes. It's your stomach acid and digestive enzymes. It's your microbiota. So it's everything from your mouth through your butt, including your skin. It has been stated that the first time the outside world meets the inside world is when something goes through your intestinal tract and gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So realistically, your digestive system is part of the outside world. But the 2 systems that we talk about most, where we want this balance, where we want this Strength, where we want this flexibility, is innate in the adaptive or acquired immune system. The innate immune system is a general defense. It's a 365, 24/7 security guards of your immune system. They're sentinels. They are stealthy. They are neutrophils, macrophages, and they engulf and destroy foreign invaders and damage cells. Whereas everybody has an innate immune system, your adaptive acquired is what it says. It's more adaptable, but you're acquired over a lifetime. When you're born, you get your immune system, your innate immune system. You acquire, you work with your adaptive immune system. Your adaptive immune system is B and T cells. Your T cells come from your thymus. Your thymus gland is interesting in that is the first gland that goes through involution. So it shrinks, and it shrinks when you're a teenager. These T cells are critical because they recognize a foreigner and tell your B cells, which come from your bone marrow, to produce antibodies, which, remember, they characterize and they catalog the incidents. The key to that is making sure the picture that your antibodies take are correct, because what we're seeing a lot of is a failure in the immune system, and we're seeing something called orthogenic original sin, meaning our immune system is taking a picture of a virus, let's say, but the variants to the virus, our body are not producing something different. They're producing the same immune system, hence the idea of why people keep getting the flu every year, etc. So we need a strong, flexible, resilient immune system, locking all three lines of defense together. Once again, immune rejuvenation. I laud Dr. Jeffrey Brand for this. He came with the idea of how immune cells can break down and how the immune cells can come back to life or regenerate them, and they're rejuvenative. Because even for me, in my 50s, I want immune rejuvenation so I can have immune resilience, and then I can support and balance my immune system. Time Magazine, 2004, talked about the secret killer being inflammation. I believe that that inflammation that they talked about in Time Magazine led to that inflammaging, where inflammation, again, damages the immune system. And again, my mantra is you want to manage and modulate inflammation. That is my credo, without question. So longevity, interestingly enough, they did a study and found that the gut microbiome was a critical element. 80% of immune cells are in your gut. It's where your macro and micronutrients are absorbed. So the idea of your inhabitants will depict how old and how strong your immunity is. People who lived to 100 had strong immune system because they displayed youth-associated features in the gut microbiome, which were characterized by an overrepresentation of bacterial dietes type of bacteria, which is a very beneficial bacteria. So again, your inhabitants are truly going to determine your health, your immune response. I like this slide because it really talks about the crosstalk. It really shows that the body is all interconnected. So the brain and the gut, whatever you do to your gut, you do to your brain. Whatever you do to your brain, you do to your gut. It's bi-directional. I call that the superhighway to health. Your gut and your immune system are bi-directional also. Whatever you do to your gut, you do to the immune system. Whatever you do to the immune system, you do to your gut. And the whole idea of your brain and your immune system also connect and converse. That said, you're looking, when this is functioning well, as the trifecta of health. When the communication has less than health set signals, I like to refer to this as the Bermuda Triangle. Again, this is one of those slides that we could be here all day, but let's go over my Dr. Rob's gut matrix. My Dr. Rob's gut matrix, 80% of your immune cells are in your gut. It's where your macro and micronutrients are absorbed. You want to avoid food sensitivities, leaky gut, and dysbiosis. Dysbiosis and leveling of good and bad bacteria. As you can see, we talked about LPS, lipopolysaccharide. Again, we'll go into more detail. That is an endotoxin that's holding the gram-negative bacteria on the inside of your gut inhabitants and your gut wall. Basically, leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability has a direct correlation to insulin problems. So a lot of people that have issues with blood sugar, yes, it's coming from the ingestion of too much sugar and too many poor ultra-processed foods. 63% of the calories that Americans consume are from ultra-processed foods. However, Leaky gut can lead to blood sugar problems, insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes. Also, the gut and the liver are bidirectional. Whatever you do to your gut, you do to your liver. Whatever you do to your liver, you do to your gut. A leaky gut increases your incidence of obesity. 75 to 78% of Americans are overweight or obese, and that number is still increasing. Leaky gut increases your incidence of autoimmunity. And one of the great examples of autoimmunity is a thyroid issue. With my chiropractic background, I love to talk about the gut and the gut to joint axis and the gut to disc axis. In that, the gut, when it's leaky, increases the release of cytokines, which increase the incidence of arthritis. In addition to that, when the gut is leaky, it increases the incidence release of MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases, your body's own proteolytic enzymes, which are released at the time of injury, and they cause, believe it or not, joint pain. They actually eat fibrocartilage, which is your disc. So when your main immune organ is not there, you have failing blood sugar problems, body composition, liver, autoimmunity, musculoskeletal, and of course, brain. Whatever you do to your gut, you do to your brain. Whatever you do to your brain, you do to your gut. So we talked about LPS. LPS is a bridge between the gut microbiota and immunity. When LPS is in the inside of your gut, it turns on, turning on a switch, interleukin 10. Interleukin 10 conversely decreases all pro-inflammatory interleukins like interleukin 1, 6, interleukin 8, and TNF alpha, which actually all impact the immune system on a larger scale. When it gets through the gut and gets into the blood system, you turn off that anti-inflammatory interleukin 10 and turn on all the pro-inflammatory interleukins. So in a nutshell, LPS, when it's floating around in the bloodstream, can attach to toll-like receptor 4. So for some conciseness, toll-like receptor 4, when it's stimulated, increases the stimulation or the signal to NF-kappa B, damages the mitochondria, and also stimulates something called NLRP3. This dual signal pathway releases all these interleukins, and you've got inflammation galore. However, toll-like receptor 4 also can translocate, and it can translocate to toll-like receptor 2, and that toll-like receptor 2 stimulates, say, an inflammation, which leads to atherosclerosis. So a leaky gut increases your incidence, or a leaky gut with the release of LPS increases your incidence of heart disease. #1 killer in America, certainly taking down that longevity number. Zonulin. Zonulin is a protein enzyme released at the time of injury. It's synthesized in intestinal and liver cells. It's a key biomarker for intestinal permeability. It has elevated levels of zonulin are associated with autoimmunity, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel, even obesity, rheumatoid arthritis. I believe zonulin is an everyday marker. It's not just a gut marker, as evidenced by this study, where higher zonulin levels are associated with a higher waist circumference, diastolic blood pressure, fasting glucose, and increased risk of metabolic disease. My Super 7R action plan is my answer. I'll do this real quick. I believe that if you want to fix your gut, you want to reset your diet, your lifestyle, and your mindset. You want to get gluten out. You want to get sugar out. You want to get dairy out. You want to get any food that may stimulate inflammation, like a food allergy or a food sensitivity. You then want to remove unwanted pathogens. You want to remove those unwanted pathogens with berberine, oregano oil, serum bovine immunoglobulin, any kind of biofilm buster. Biofilm is a bacteria igloo that's very common. 80% of bacterial infections in the gut, according to the NIH, have a biofilm. So you want to break those up. And last but not least, you may want to use garlic as well. You want to replace what? Digestive enzymes, stomach acids, and of course, bile. The fourth R is regenerate. You want to regenerate damaged intestinal mucosa. You want to use pleiotropic nutrients that allow you to have anti-inflammation in the gut and also heal and seal the gut lining. The fifth R is you want to reinoculate with not just probiotics, but pre and probiotics. All probiotics need a good prebiotic because the prebiotic will allow you to feed the probiotic. At this point, the sixth R, you want to reintroduce certain foods. You want to retest. You want to see if you're still allergic, or certainly if you're still sensitive to the foods. And hopefully you've met clinical outcome. You want to retain your health and your GI integrity, by staying on a health-promoting diet and using appropriate supplementation. The bottom line is the most effective clinical outcomes come from all disease spectrums can result from the normalization of gut function. You normalize your gut function, you normalize your immunity, you will then have longevity. Fascia is a fact. You can see it. It's the saran wrap of the body. When you pull a chicken skin away from the meat, that fascia, that white film, that's fascia. The white film on salmon, and when you open the salmon, that's fascia. It's an intracellular communicator. You can see the plethora of different things that it innervates: cartilage, bone, blood, lymph, connective tissue, heart, skin, meninges, smooth muscle, just to name a few. The fascial system is the largest system in the body and is the only system that touches every other system. So in functional medicine, I'm a big believer in using symptoms to get to systems, and getting the systems to allow you to get to what I refer to as root cause resolution. Fascia is the one system that is compromised, usually in a musculoskeletal injury, that can damage all the other systems in the body. Fascia shows to me every day that the body is all interconnected. Fascia is the living matrix. It's your body's full wetsuit. It's connective tissue. It's the sheath in the body. It's below and below. It is below and above the muscle, just like we talked about the skin coming from the chicken. Lymph nodes live in the fascia. Nerves are in fascia. It is a sensory organ. And the fascia, believe it or not, accounts for about 20% of the body mass or your body weight. Loss of muscle mass, sarcopenia. Please make note of this. 1 to 2% of muscle loss each year after age 40. You may lose up to 25% of your muscle mass by age 65. Obviously, I'm going to suggest everybody do weight resistance. The less muscle mass really leads to an inability to efficiently dispose of glucose. So the more muscle you have, the better you are at assimilating and breaking down glucose. Those people who don't have muscle mass are usually people that have high blood sugar issues. And of course, to avoid sarcopenia, you want to have a microbiome modulation. You want to add probiotics in muscle recovery and growth. You want to have the production of short-chain fatty acids. All of this will impact muscle fatigue and recovery, obviously decrease fatigue and increase recovery. Dr. Gabrielle Lyons has said muscle mass is the longevity organ. Immune resilience is critical need for muscle mass. It has been stated that immune resilience is the capacity to maintain a good immune function called immunocompetence and minimize inflammation while experiencing inflammatory stressors leading to muscle mass. What exercises? Push-ups, pull-ups, air squats. We don't have to go in the gym and have a 600-pound deadlift. Farmer's walk, body weight exercises. Men and women both need to do some sort of weight resistance. 50% of your workout should be based on weight resistance. Zombie cells, senescent cells. They're cells, senescent cells are cells that are dead but don't go away, and that's why we call them zombie cells, like the Boris Karloff film. The problem with them is that these zombie senescent cells are spilling out inflammatory markers or inflammatory cytokines. Senescent cells typically do accumulate with aging. They impede organ function. They create chronic inflammation. They emit protein-destroying enzymes. They shorten a healthy lifespan. By removing senescent cells, you actually can confer with a healthy longevity. And what's the best way to get rid of senescent cells? I believe it may be intermittent fasting. Paracelsus once said, fasting is the greatest remedy, the physician within. So I believe in an intermittent fast between 14 and 16 hours. I also believe in an eating window in 8 to 10 hours. So intermittent fasting, or if you will, more properly defined as time-restrictive eating, induces autophagy. We'll get to that in a moment. Improves circadian rhythm. That's a critical overlooked element, your ability to be in tune with your environment. It's something that Americans in the current market have really lost. It's going to promote longevity, promotes weight loss, increases insulin sensitivity, improves cognition, improves gut health, and that autophagy won a 2016 Nobel Prize. The idea the discovery of the concept of autophagy, won a 2016 Nobel Prize. Essentially, autophagy is self-devouring. You eat old cells, break it down, you use that debris to make new cells. So now you have those immune rejuvenative cells. You can also break down mitochondria and have mitophagy. So your ability to self-clean is a critical element to rebuilding your immune system and many other factors for health. Therefore, you do want to try in many instances to intermittent fast. Fasting reduces inflammation and improves chronic inflammatory disease. So the takeaway here from this Mount Sinai study was it doesn't affect the acute inflammation or autophagy, but it stops. It puts the brakes on chronic inflammation. So autophagy works in a myriad of different ways to promote health-promoting properties. Here's another, maybe a capstone moment in the talk, is the idea of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, goes from the medulla oblongata, the bottom of the brainstem, down through the transverse colon. The cranial nerve is a critical nerve in the gut to brain axis, in the brain to gut axis. Vagus nerve is about 80 to 90% afferent and about 10 to 20% efferent. Both of those pathways are anti-inflammatory. So to get proper vagus nerve stimulation, vagus nerve is the captain of the parasympathetic nervous system. It balances your autonomic nervous system. Most people are in a sympathetic response, meaning they're in a fight or flight. They have anxiety. They have an ability to digest. When you bring up your vagus nerve tone and your vagus nerve performance, you're able to rest and digest, wine and dine. You want everything to be in a homeostatic manner. So vagus nerve tone is a critical element, and vagus nerve is highly integrated with the immune system. Just take a look at all the different organs that it helps and modulates. But I actually put an arrow by the spleen. So for me, the vagus nerve is really the key anti-inflammatory nerve in that it communicates with the splenic nerve. So it has a vagal splenic pathway to the spleen. The spleen is a respite or rest stop of sorts for immune cells. However, with a spleen, when stimulated, typically when the vagus nerve tone is decreased, spills out macrophages, and these macrophages have the ability to stimulate TNF alpha and release interleukins. Now, here's the beauty of the vagus nerve. When vagus nerve tone is increased, it produces acetylcholine in the spleen, and that blocks the release of the TNF alpha. So much so that now the vagus nerve has 3 different ways or mechanisms, if you will, to be anti-inflammatory. So that said, stimulating the vagus nerve increases acetylcholine, reduces inflammation, improves outcome in autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, and all that is because it inhibits cytokine production, or at least attenuates it, mitigates it to about 30%. Vagus nerve stimulation actually activates the inflammatory reflex. It's a safe, effective treatment for young adults. It's shown to decrease just vagus nerve stimulation, 50% of Crohn's disease and 43% of ulcerative colitis. They achieve clinical remission. There's many techniques that I use to stimulate the vagus nerve, one of which is a physiological sigh. So it's 2 short breaths, 1 long breath, and one of my secret sauces, if you will, is low-level laser applied to the vagus nerve. Let's close. Let me give you some implementable ideas on what you can do so you can have some immune reboot hacks. Number 1, please all avoid certain foods. Use my acronyms GPS. No gluten, no processed food, no added sugar. DNA, avoid dairy, nicotine, artificial sweeteners. Avoid all vegetable oils. There are no vegetables in vegetable oils. They're seed oils. They are no bueno, and try not to eat any deep fried foods. Follow an anti-inflammatory diet. Control your glycemic load and your glycemic index. Detect and avoid food sensitivities. I believe that food sensitivities are one of the main reasons for hidden chronic inflammation, and try and limit your environmental overload. We're all exposed. Make clean eating a priority. Organic is a great choice. Eat wild smash fish, smash, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Base your vegetables and a lot of your meals on a plant-forward diet. have some fruits and vegetables, grass-fed meats, eat high-fiber foods, nuts and seeds, chicken soup, and of course, bone broth. If you're going to snack on organic dark chocolate, have appropriate fluid intake. If you're going to have the beverages, I am a coffee person, so have some organic coffee and tea. Cooking oils are going to be extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, coconut, and macadamia nut. Don't forget to consume mushrooms. They're so low calorie, but they have so many health promoting properties. Again, consider a time restrictive eating, intermittent fast, 12 to 16 hours of fasting. Get sufficient sleep. I can't emphasize this hack enough. 1 night of sleep loss for college students has a deleterious effect to your brain, a permanent deleterious effect. I mean, I did some all-nighters in college. I did some all-nighters in chiropractic school. I wish I knew this now. Also, your brain shrinks to 40% of its size to squeeze out like a sponge metabolic waste when you sleep. Sleep is a critical element to improving your overall immune health. Get an exercise plan, home exercise if you need, chiropractic care, low-level laser, modify your stress, and again, support your already balanced, resilient immune system. And I always like to end with a quote. Extending our lifespan is important to humans, but maintaining one's health span is even more critical for a high quality of life. The immune system was one of the most important determinants that influence not only how long we live, but also how well we feel as we reach an 80-year-old or older status and well and beyond. So it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to me. Again, great talking with you. Hope to see you soon. I'm Dr. Rob Silverman. Always yours in health.
Well, here we are at my favorite part of all of our educational programs that we do, and that's the opportunity to, as they say, play jazz with the experts, to do a little repartee, a little bit of a off-script discussion about this topic and what a topic this is and what information you as participants have been exposed to. I would say this is the creme de creme. This is really been one of those programs that has lots of news to use, lots of takeaway, lots of hopefully stimulation, excitement, vision of the future, all sorts of things going on here simultaneously in this hologram of this presentation. So reminding all of you that when we talk about, as Mark has so beautifully captured Forever Young, this whole longevity movement, that there are many things going on. This is a very dynamic field right now. We've got the cold baths, we've got hypoxia, and we've got hyperbarics, and we've got fasting, and we've got senolytics, and we've got sonotherapy, and we've got deep breathing, and we've got fasting mimicking diets, and we got hormones, and we got program exercise, and we got fascial reconstruction, vagus nerve stimulation. I mean, wow, this laundry list is pretty dramatic of some of the things that have been suggested having input into this biological aging process and retardation of aging, and even what we have talked about, which is rejuvenation or turning back the biological clock. So, Mark, you kind of lead the charge here as it relates to travels around the world, similar to what Dan Buettner has done with the Blue Zones, and looking at people that have historically really remarkable longevities until they moved to a Western country and started eating fast foods and ultra processed food. Could you kind of just give us a summary of kind of the snapshot of your travels and what you learned as kind of a visual image of what this whole aging thing is all about?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I mean, we know it's not anything really surprising because it's just common sense. And unfortunately, we make things very complicated. But what happened in these cultures, like what Dan referred to as the Blue Zones, these places in the world where there's 20 times the centenarians, for example, that we have in America, is that they, by default, have certain environments and habits that activate their longevity pathways. So they live in an environment, their food is basically whole, real, organic food. They eat lots of phytochemicals, lots of phytochemically rich, actually animal foods, including, goat milk and sheep milk that eat wild plants. They don't know actually what they're doing. They just know that if they feed the animal certain things at certain wild plants at certain times of the year, that the food tastes better. So, one of the guys I met there, Olinto, said, we flavor our meat before we kill the animal. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, well, it depends on what we're feeding them. We feed them acorns, and we feed them, carob, and we feed them all these things that actually have impact on the flavor. So their diets are incredibly nutrient dense, phytochemically rich, often full of wild foods like mushrooms and wild greens. And Icaria, you just go to a restaurant, you can get wild greens all the time. Second, they have, natural movement. They move as part of their life. They live in very rocky or challenging terrains. They have to hike and walk everywhere. And so they naturally move, and they've been very active as shepherds and farmers and just living in a way that actually uses their bodies naturally. They also have a deep sense of connection and community, really celebrating together, living together. There's no nursing homes. There's no putting people out to pasture. Even if, people don't have kids. I know a woman, Julia, who was 103 months, she said, and she basically, didn't have any kids, but she lived with her niece and nephew, and they took care of her, and it was really beautiful. And she was still active at 100 years old, working and making doilies for weddings and all kinds of stuff, taking her walks. And so I think the just natural deep sense of connection and community and belonging and meaning and purpose plays a huge role in their longevity. And then, I think lastly, they really have no kind of chronic stress. I think they may have acute stresses here or there with the normal vicissitudes of life, but I met this guy Silvio, and he had a shepherd. They had this farm on the top of this mountain, and we had hundreds of sheep and goats his family had had for generations. And I said, Silvio, do you have any stress in your life? And he was like, what do you mean? He's like, stress. Things are difficult. He's like, oh, yeah. Sometimes he thought for a long while. He's like, sometimes at night when a goat gets out, I have to go get it, and I hear the bell. So I think naturally they just have developed these environments that foster health and the activation of a lot of our longevity pathways. They naturally have hormesis just by the way they live. And I think, that's sort of low tech. I mean, they don't take supplements. They don't have, stem cell injections. They're not doing hyperbaric oxygen. And then they really have very long lives. I mean, there was a couple that I think it was collectively 210 years old, so I think it's impressive. But I think we really now understand some of the mechanisms of these pathways, and unfortunately in the West we can't easily do the things that they do. So we might need a little extra strategies, which we can talk about. But it was very enlightening to go see these communities.
That was a great insight, and that kind of sets in context everything that we're talking about, because I think we look at the aging baby boomers in this demographics of the United States. We look at what's going on with our declining mean average life expectancy, which was unheard of when I was younger. And the concept that our mean average life expectancy would go down as a culture as a consequence of things that are going on was just like would never happen, but it has happened.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we've got all these various factors. Rob, you've done a beautiful job in your book, Immune Rebuke, in which you really talked a lot about some of the things from your observations, your perspective, that really deliver into people modifiable factors that can be used for improving immune function that then translates to improved aging. Can you kind of just once again summarize for us some of the observations you've made?
There was an interesting 2023 study that came out of centenarians that showed that many have a microbiome with a bacteria made up of a younger person. So we realized that longevity and relative good health supports the idea that a long and healthy lifespan is associated with useful signatures in the makeup of the gut microbiome. So we all know that the gut is the epicenter of our health. All of you have all said up to about 80% of your immune cells are in your gut. And I do believe that gut health leads to immune health. You've also done, Dr. Bland, a beautiful job of talking about immune resilience, the concept of the ability of our immune system to be flexible. If COVID has shown us anything, if I could use that, we found out that our immune system is not flexible. It is not resilient. We're taking the same picture. So some of the things that Dr. Hyman signifies in his longevity book, with beautifully written, really explains the idea of how to imbue your immune system with proper fashions to allow it to function at a very, very high level. A couple of big takeaways, though. Number one, and we have talked about this before, the vagus nerve. I'm a big proponent of the vagus nerve being the superhighway to health. Vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10. It goes from the medulla oblongata to the brainstem down to the intestinal tract. It's 80 to 90% afferent. It actually communicates with these things called neuropods, which are neurons that allow the communication between the gut to the brain. And as you just said the other night when I heard you, the immune system and the central nervous system are the key systems that are on 24/7, 365. And that linchpin to the immune system to allow those two to communicate is without question the vagus nerve. So vagus nerve tone, increasing the parasympathetic nervous system is a critical element to overall health immune system. Hence, one of the things that I think we could consider for longevity.
Yeah, thank you. Beautifully. And that actually segues beautifully into Dr. Austin Perlmutter and his best-selling book, Brainwash, in which, Austin, you've really kind of brought this topic, I think, much more up to our understanding as it relates to mood, minds, emotions, how they are tied together with our central nervous system function that's connected to our immune system, how that then can translate into aging, which is sometimes aging is part of our state of mind, so to speak. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that traffic travels down your road.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to build on what Robert and Mark are talking about, and then we'll get into the brain piece of this. But if you look at where we stand right now, I think by any objective measure, we're not doing well. I mean, you could look at rates of metabolic dysfunction, somewhere upward of 90%. You could look at rates of chronic inflammatory diseases, which are the top killers and contributors to disability around the world. But you start from the assumption, and I'd say, again, the objective measurement, that things aren't going the right way. And then you can ask the why. And there are so many different versions of why. But if you think about the community aspect of it, and you think about what are the people who are living the longest, feeling the best into their 90s and beyond doing, it's I would say, an expanded version of this community. So it's the interpersonal interactions that Dr. Hyman is talking about, but it's connection with our food. So food, we know in the Western society, has basically become an ultra-processed substitute. And Mark, you've described this so well in your previous books. But it's also the microbiome, right? That is a community living within us. So 39 trillion bacteria, primarily in the large intestine. And we know that their signals are directly impacting who we are each day. And really where all of this converges, whether it's the social connection or the food that we eat or the microbiome, the signals running up through the vagus nerve, is in our organ of life experience. That's the brain. And something that Robert alluded to is that if you really think about what's going on in your brain, what is driving your day-to-day activities, what is making you think, act, and feel the way you think, act, and feel, we like to put all the spotlight on our neurons, which certainly are amazing. You've got something like 80 billion neurons in your head, but half the cells in your brain are glial cells. And of those cells, we have these microglial cells, about 15% of the total cells in your brain. And the research is pretty outstanding here. Because you think, okay, neurons change how we think, act, and feel, but who's driving that ship? Who's directing the neurons? It turns out it's in part your brain's immune cells that are aggregating these signals from your food, from your microbiome, from the data you take in through your eyes and ears, whether you're interacting with friends and family, making meaningful connections, or watching stressful news or scrolling on social media all day. They are physically and functionally changed, these microglial cells, into completely disparate subtypes that either promote inflammation, promote resolution, or something in between. And that very well may be driving a huge uptick in these neurological conditions that range from mental health disorders that affect probably billions of people on Earth now, to cognitive diseases like Alzheimer's disease, which has an increasing rate, somewhere upwards of 150 million predicted in the next couple of decades. So any way you slice it, I do think the immune system is kind of the central conduit, whether it's the immune cells in the gut or the immune cells in the brain or in the liver or in the skin or in the lungs. But we have to think about, what is all of this data coming in? I think, to go back to Mark's point, we really are a reflection of the larger community. So where we spend our time and where we spend our focus. One of the things I love so much about PLMI, Jeff, is that you bring together people and ideas that support a community that allows us to thrive.
No, thank you. That's a beautiful way of summarizing it. And you said something there that took me back that I hadn't thought about for some time. I'm going to do a little nostalgia with Mark Hyman here. So let's see, this would probably be upwards of 30 years ago, I would think, that I was invited to a conclave at Canyon Ranch, Tucson, that was hosted by the founder that Mark knows very well of Original Canyon Ranch, he and his wife, to explore how do we measure aging. It was the biometrics of aging, and the convener of that conference, or the person who kind of led it, was at the time the head of the National Institutes on Aging, and we had a lot of people. I think there were 20 different representatives from different disciplines that were all aging-related researchers, from epidemiology to animal science to blah, blah, blah. And we tried to land on a set of biomarkers that would define aging. And I'd have to say, after 4 days and a lot of heavy lifting and thoughts and conversation, we were unable to do so. We wrote a paper that was published on this, and the paper basically said, we explored everything, but we don't know if there is such a thing as to how you actually quantify aging. So Mark, you have tremendous experience going back to the Lenox Canyon Ranch era, and people coming in and looking for services in this area. How do we help them understand their aging process?
Well, I think right now, I think we're at this incredible moment in healthcare where we're not just thinking about the typical analytes that we've looked at for 70 years, like your chem screen, CBC, cholesterol panel, urinalysis, which is basically what people get their annual checkup, and a really ability to do deep phenotyping and to try to make sense of what all that means as our biological systems go through the trajectory of our life. And the hallmarks of aging I touched on in my talk. I literally just talked about one. I could talk about each one for hours and hours. And I think the understanding is that there are fundamental things that we can now track and measure that are indicators of abnormal processes and things that degrade as we get older that can be modified. And that can be intervened with various modalities, from diet and lifestyle to hormesis therapies, phytochemicals, regenerative therapies like hyperbaric oxygen, or stem cells, or plasmapheresis. That for example, I had a plasmapheresis the other day, which took off 2 liters of my plasma. It's like getting an oil filter change, and there's really some interesting data about that. It's sort of still on the bleeding edge of medicine, but I like to be there a little bit and experiment myself. But I think we're now on the track a lot of the things that are going to make a huge difference. And by aggregating data from omics, from our metabolome or microbiome, I mean, there's 100,000 terabytes of data in our microbiome alone, because of the DNA and the proteins they produce. And literally there's petabytes of data on each one of us that we're completely ignoring, that are now soon going to be part of our deep phenotyping. It's with emerging capabilities to do whole genome sequencing for $400, to look at our metabolome, our microbiome, quantified self-metric biosensors, wearables, implantables. I mean, the data is just going to explode. And all that's going to be filtered through a knowledge-informed expert AI system informed by the paradigm of systems, network, functional medicine. And using that deep phenotyping, we're going to be able to sort of track people's biological systems. Now, there are sort of metrics now that people are using, and different either direct or indirect measures of biological aging, like DNA methylation patterns. Morgan Levine has her, epigenetic sort of DNA, what they call mDNA phenotype, essentially is using a sort of correlated biomarkers that seem to track along other indicators of aging. Which are approximations, and you see huge variations. If you do every biological age test out there, whether it's Morgan Levine's calculator, or Thorne's calculator, or DNA methylation calculators, or telomere length, or different labs that do the same test, you're going to see it's going to all over the place. But you're going to see trend lines that I think are emerging, and that help you track over time anything you're doing to modify your biological age. And that's what's really exciting to me, is we now have metrics to start to look at, in addition to things we always look at, right? Like our insulin levels and lipid levels, and things we've tracked in functional medicine for years that may be a little bit deeper. But this is just a whole next level that's coming very soon.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really exciting, expansive perspective that you provided us as to where we are, but also where we're going and the rate of
Mm.
change. The calculus of
Mm.
change is really dramatic. And so, Rob,
Yeah.
let me go back to you for a sec, because you have dealt for years very successfully as a leader in the clinical side of this, where people come in with certain expectations, they express their desires in certain ways as it relates to their own visualization or feeling of their aging process. What are the kind of things that people are interested in, and how, does it everything from sarcopenia, which is a very common feature of advancing age, to the way they look in the mirror every morning when they look back, and what are the things that have been drivers you see for people getting concerned about aging?
I think sarcopenia is a great choice. Dr. Hyman has it on his litany list. You do want to, without question, avoid sarcopenia. Muscle mass is the longevity organ, or Dr. Hyman has said longevity or muscle mass is the currency of longevity. We lose 1 to 2% of muscle each year after age 40, and up to 25% muscle mass loss by 65. So one of the first things that we talk about in a clinical setting is weight resistance. It's not a 500-pound dumbbell. It's not a deadlift. It's not anything about that. Bands are great, but it's the ability to try and hold on to muscle mass, because less muscle mass leads to inability to efficiently dispose of glucose. So here you have this big problem, diabetes, an increase in blood sugar dysregulation, and a lot can be attributed not just to the current environment where everybody's consuming too much sugar, etc. Also the fact that sarcopenia is present. And when you look at sarcopenia in reference to the microbiome modulation, probiotics, prebiotics, they aid in muscle recovery and growth. They produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is the gold medal winner, and they actually impact muscle fatigue and recovery. One of the biggest problems that I've noticed with the lack of muscle mass is the injuries, or the fascial injuries. And we don't get to talk about that enough. So the effect of fascia. So the way I describe fascia is, has anyone ever taken the skin from a chicken? And now comes the skin, and there's this little white film between the muscle and the skin. That's fascia. It's an intracellular communicator, because now people consider fascia part of your skin. It is the largest system in the body, and is the only system that touches every other system. And in functional medicine, we have the father of functional medicine here. Aren't we talking about the integration of systems? Symptoms lead to systems to allow us to get to root cause resolution. I'm going to make a case that we should put fascial injuries on that list of systems, because you can have acute and chronic pain with a chiropractic background. You can have prolonged fascial contraction leading to musculoskeletal pain, again, which really reiterates the idea is that the body is all interconnected. And more so when you break down fascia at a granular level, it's living matrix. It's the full body's wetsuit. It's connective tissue. It's sheath under the body. It's below the skin and above the muscle. Lymph nodes and nerves live in fascia. It's our sensory organ. It's actually an intracellular communicator. So if someone comes in with a musculoskeletal injury, they're increasing inflammation through the whole part of your body. And as we all know, people are too pre-inflamed. And lastly, fascia accounts for about 20% of the body mass. And the last real takeaway about fascia is connective tissue is 1,000 times faster than nerve impulses. So if anything, if we're worried about sarcopenia, get them moving, obviously change their environment, but let's also look at some of the fascial injuries that they all may have and have acquired over the duration of time.
Wow, that is really powerful and insightful information, because we recognize that this takes us into physical medicine or physical therapy, and all, the kind of tried and proven things that go back in cultures, Reiki and fascial manipulation and massage and all sorts of techniques. Probably every culture has ways of managing fascial related injuries as part of their therapy. So really good insight for us. So let me jump over, if I can, to the other big wild card. Maybe it's not a wild card. It's actually the big tuning knob that is a common shared human experience, at least as far as everyone I've ever met, and that's called eating. Everybody eats something sometime. And then the question is, does that then play a role in the modulation? And so, Austin, I know you've been involved, obviously, and you talked about it in your presentation, really trying to understand the mechanism by which signals that come from diet then ultimately get translated into these topics that are the feature of Mark's book, The Hallmarks of Aging. So maybe you could give us a little insight to the diet nutrition connection.
Well, let me start by saying I'm probably the most recently through conventional medical training of anyone on this call. And I'd like to say that we've really made some dramatic changes, that the nutrition education that is given to MDs these days is so much better than the deficiency model or the caloric model that I think, Jeff, you and Mark probably recall quite well from those early years of med school. That's obviously not the case. And there's a really fascinating scenario right now where we've seen a resurgence of this idea of food is medicine. And I know everyone on this call is participating in that conversation in some way. And I'll say simultaneously, I'm thrilled that the government cares about this, that industry cares about this, that academic institutions care about this. And come on, like the idea that food has the ability to heal people, that it comes out as some sort of a novel idea, although people have been using this exact idea for thousands of years, even thousands of years BCE. I think it's great that there is this concept, but if you really look at why we are needing food as medicine or food to be medicine, it is because we have used food as poison for so long that the basic idea of what we're consuming has been really built around calories and the concept that macronutrients are perhaps the only thing that matters. And then to some extent, we don't want deficiency by not getting vitamins and minerals. And so if we go to the place of saying, well, food does have the ability to heal, and it's more than just starvation, it's more than just running out of a micronutrient that is going to lead to a disease state, then we get to this ability to have a very reasonable conversation that at this point is kind of a multidisciplinary crossing boundaries conversation between industry and government and academia, which is that there's a whole lot of information in food beyond just the basics. And so in that vein, we have this conversation about phytochemicals, which Mark already alluded to, this family of thousands of molecules naturally produced by plants, because unlike humans, if a plant faces a threat, it doesn't have the ability to pack its bags and run for the hills. So it has to produce these molecules to defend itself against UV radiation or predation. It turns out that when humans consume these molecules, effects happen within our bodies as well. And this is something that humans have known, I think, for a long, long time. But what's really interesting right now, and where our conversation is going for one of the first times, is the understanding that depending on the soil that a plant is grown in and the microbes in that soil, a plant will have different phytochemicals, in particular polyphenols. And that when a human consumes those plants, and I guess by extension, if they consume animals that have been consuming those plants, they may get very targeted signals to their DNA by way of these polyphenols, by way of these phytochemicals, and that these signals may in fact be one of the most powerful sources of resilience in humans. So what we're in essence discussing here is a multi-step transfer of data from the soil to the human that modifies health at all levels. And what we've started to uncover with this research is that there are certain signals in certain plants that have specific effects on aspects of our immune system. So that is a lot, but it feels like it is a complete change in the way that we view this idea that food contains important data, because we've gone past the basic concept, macros and micros. We've even surpassed this idea that antioxidants are really the key. And Jeff, we've spoken about this at length. You know, there's this idea that we want more antioxidants, and yet clinical trials show that when you give people high doses of antioxidants, they have problems. Not only do they not get better, but they have higher rates of, for example, lung cancer. These are issues with this hypothesis. So the new hypothesis, I think, is saying that molecules like polyphenols work not through this antioxidant overarching effect where they're quenching these reactive oxygen species, but rather that they are exerting targeted effects on epigenetic modification. And in doing so, are reprogramming the immune system towards resilience. And if you start to get into what this really means, it's impossible to believe in the idea of a human in isolation. And so this gets a little bit to philosophy, but the human is therefore not just a combination of, again, 39 trillion or so cells. They are part of a network that includes the microbiome, but also the food that they are eating, the soil that that food was grown in, and the communications between those plants and the microbes in that soil. So this is a big picture idea for, I think, humanity on the whole, but it's also really the natural evolution of what we mean by personalized medicine, because food becomes not just basic nutrition, but rather targeted signals to the epigenome and the immune system.
Mm.
So this is
Yeah.
why I love this kind of interrogative among you as experts, because out of this come pearls that we didn't necessarily put in our formal presentation that are ahas. You captured so eloquently, I think, Austin, much of what all of us stand for and how we try to communicate and the message that we're trying to have people understand. You know, I asked Chat GPT last night just to check in. I asked it, are the effects on the immune system that we see from nutrition principally a consequence of the antioxidants in our food, or the effect that nutrients in our food have on the signals that modulate how cells express their genes? And it was very interesting to see what Chat GPT said. It said, in the past, antioxidants have been thought to be very important in establishing how cells ultimately would age and do their function. But more recently, it is now recognized that we are really operant as a consequence of specific signals that specific substances in our diet have that modulate gene expression beyond that of their antioxidant effect. So we're witnessing a paradigm shift right now that's quite dramatic as it relates to the process of biological aging and resilience. So, and you were all leaders in communicating this message. So we're kind of coming to the close. So I want to give you each a chance to kind of give a news to use to our listeners that you feel might send them off into this new advancing space of forever young and biological aging and immune health. So Mark, you want to take a shot at anything you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it can get very complex and convoluted, but it really comes down to some basic principles and daily habits, right? That you incorporate to create profound effects, and that the 80-20 on this is really stuff that's accessible to all of us. In terms of nutrition and diet, I go deep into it in my talk and book, particularly on this pathway of deregulated nutrient sensing, which is one of the key hallmarks of aging. But, through what we eat, when we eat, how we eat, the phytochemicals we include, the timing of food, various things that we do, for example, overnight fasting and so forth, we can actually activate many of these ancient preserved longevity pathways, these ancient survival pathways that are designed to activate our renewal, repair, regenerative systems. And I think understanding that this is the key strategy here, which is what functional medicine for me is all about. People say, what is functional medicine? I say it's the science of creating health. How do we understand? It's like, or the I think Leroy Hood talks about this concept of scientific wellness. I think this is exactly what functional medicine is about. And so by understanding how to modulate our biological pathways using things accessible to us like food, exercise, stress modification, sleep, hormesis practices, whether it's hot and cold therapies, it's very simple. So for example, this morning I woke up and I did a 30-minute band workout. I did some stretching. I did a sauna, a cold plunge, had my 40 to 5 grams of goat whey protein with creatine and some frozen berries. And I had my stack of supplements that I take. And within, let's say an hour or a little bit more than an hour, I was able to sort of include many of the things that actually are designed to activate and maintain my health and longevity pathways. So it doesn't have to be onerous or difficult. This evening, I'm going out to dinner with friends and having, connection and community, which is another part of the social benefits of our connections that drive longevity. So I think I detail it quite a lot in the book. And I think I want to just highlight what Austin said, because these phytochemicals that are in foods have broad-ranging effects, not just as antioxidants, but on regulating many of these ancient conserved longevity pathways, like mTOR, for example. mTOR inhibition can be achieved via luripine from olive oil, or urolithin A, which is a postbiotic that comes from pomegranate and berries, or resveratrol, other molecules that are easily accessible to us that we can that we can use, green tea, berberine, and all these things are actually available to us as little sort of nuggets of useful information that we can start to add in these things to our life and our lifestyle in a systematic way over time, and just naturally activate our biological systems to reverse the progression of biological aging and actually make us biologically younger as we get chronologically older.
Well, thank you. That's a good flip over to Austin. So Austin, maybe you want to just kind of talk a little bit about your thought as you travel now. As you said, you're the newest member of the community, but you've got the most freshest ideas because you're not kind of poisoned by some of the stuff we've been carrying here. So your thoughts?
Well, I guess I'll just, piggyback or resonate with what Mark is saying. I think it's so easy to get caught up in this idea of you have to hit a specific milligram dosing, you have to do a specific exercise for a specific amount of time. And it often, if not most of the time, leads to this kind of decision paralysis or the New Year's resolution effect, which is why most diets fail, why most people's exercise plans fall apart, and their gym membership, is a great thing for the gym, but not so good for them. And I was asked the other day in an interview, tell me a little bit about your day and your daily healthy routines. And I started by saying, it's going to sound incredibly boring to you. And I think that's honestly the key to this. I mean, as much as modern science has shown us these pathways, if you were to really ask what are the things that from a scientific perspective have been most studied and most efficacious for prolonging lifespan, for improving immune balance, for creating healthy, happy bodies, these are the basics done right. It's the compounding interest that comes from the simple things. And I was listening to a lecture the other day, and the lady was saying, humans are the only species that have to be told what to eat. Other animals just go out there and they eat what they need. They choose what they need based on their environment. And I think that there is really an opportunity here for us to overthink this. Now, the modern world is not a healthy world. I think the analogy of a fish swimming in a polluted river is the truth. However, the solutions to these things are often just doubling down on doing the things, and I know I've been saying this a bit, but that make you a little bit of a weirdo in a modern world where poor health is the default. But you're actually going to be doing the things that for the majority of our time here on Earth have been considered normal and healthy. So getting sleep sounds boring, but it's one of the most powerful ways to regulate your brain function, your immune system. Eating real food sounds boring, but it is one of the most powerful ways to regulate your immune system and improve your whole body health. And the same with movement. I mean, I think we, again, are caught in a society where we want to do a 50-minute HIIT training 4 times a day because somebody told us this is the quickest way to shred your abs and shred off that extra belly fat. The healthiest people I know and the happiest people I know are not the extremists. So with all that, I mean, I know we're a little bit beyond the hardcore biochemistry that underlies all of this, but I think the takeaway message is that becoming a weirdo in the modern world is essential if you want a good chance at health. And the best ways to prioritize your health, including your immune health, are doing the basics well and doing the basics consistently.
No, thank you, Rob. That's a great segue over to you and your years of clinical experience and dealing with the expectations and sometimes the disillusionments or disappointments that people have. That they want quick fixes and they want everything to happen yesterday. Maybe you could give us some clinical reality here as it relates to how we manage these expectations for healthy aging.
Absolutely. I definitely want to reiterate what Dr. Hyman and Dr. Perlmutter said, that lifestyle is the key component. As Jack LaLanne once said, if man makes it, I won't eat it. I think that's one of the best diets that we could all adhere to. I usually give my patients some easy acronyms to remember. GPS, no gluten, no processed food, actually no ultra processed food, no added sugar. DNA, try and avoid cow dairy, no nicotine, no artificial sweeteners, no vegetable oils, no deep fried foods. Very simple asks. I mean, if I were to give that, I always tell them that's my $1,000 nutritional consult. In addition to that, I like to say that the most effective clinical outcomes across all disease spectrums can result from the normalization of gut function, which can lead to longevity and obviously increasing health span and vitality. And I know we're a little confined on time, so I'd like to close with the idea of Uncovering the secrets of longevity and health span has been the goal of humanity. From alchemy and elixirs to the modern day supplements and genetic engineering, we've always thought the secrets of longevity and health span. For me, the key to longevity is turning on the health switches in the body. The master switch is having a resilient and robust immune system.
Well, thank you. I think the three of you really did exactly what these panel discussions are designed to do, and that is to really reinforce, amplify, and create synthesis of ideas. And you individually provided tremendous amounts of news to use in your presentations, and this kind of collective web that you've woven here in the last panel discussion, I think, is priceless. This is something that people can take and hopefully inspiration as well as some things that they can apply their perspiration to in the process. I think the concept of healthy aging, it's really a very personal thing. It's in the eye of the beholder. What does a person have as expectations throughout their life in terms of performance and in terms of being present for the maximum opportunities that their life might provide for them? So on behalf of the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute and also our co-sponsor of this program, Big Bold Health, I want to thank the three of you. You've really given very priceless information to the people that will benefit from this program. And I wish you well. And we're all going to continue to push forward with this concept that food is medicine, that there is something about personalized lifestyle intervention that can make a difference, and that we can fight back against the thought that single molecules against complexity of health and disease are the solutions. So thanks a million. Be well, everybody.